Welcome, weary traveler, to a journey through the fading world of Lordran, where fire dies and darkness gathers like fog in ancient valleys. Tonight, we'll follow the complete path of the chosen undead, from their awakening in the northern undead asylum to the moment they must choose the fate of the world itself. This is a tale of gods and demons, of kingdoms built on lies and truths buried in ash. So settle into comfort, let your mind drift like embers on a dying wind, and allow yourself to be carried through this world where death is not an end, but merely another beginning. There's no urgency here, only the patient unfolding of legend. Close your eyes and let us begin. In the depths of the northern undead asylum, where hope goes to die and the cursed are left to rot in forgotten cells, something stirs that was not meant to stir again. The stone walls of this ancient prison have witnessed countless souls succumb to the hollowing that awaits all undead, their minds crumbling like old parchment, until nothing remains but shambling husks, driven by the most basic instincts of hunger and violence. Yet today is different. Today, a corpse awakens with eyes that still hold the spark of consciousness, hands that still remember how to grasp with purpose, rather than mere instinct. This is the moment that will echo through the ages, though the awakening soul knows nothing yet of the weight that destiny has placed upon their shoulders. They are undead, yes, but they are something more, something that the prophecy whispered about in hushed tones, something that the ancient powers both feared and desperately needed. The curse of undeath is not merely death without ending, though that burden alone would drive most minds to madness. It is the slow erosion of everything that makes a person human: memory, emotion, purpose, until only the hollow shell remains. Most who bear this curse find themselves drawn inexorably toward that final emptiness, their souls gradually burning away like candle wax until nothing remains but the mechanical repetition of existence without meaning. But the chosen undead is different, marked by something beyond mortal understanding. Where others feel the pull toward hollowing as an inevitable tide, they experience it as a challenge to be resisted, a darkness to be held at bay through sheer force of will. They are what the old texts called the chosen, though that title carries with it burdens that no mortal should be asked to bear. The cell where they awaken is identical to hundreds of others that line the asylum's corridors, a cramped space carved from living rock, furnished with nothing but a thin layer of straw and the accumulated despair of countless previous occupants. The walls are damp with condensation that never quite dries, and the air carries the scent of decay that has seeped so deeply into the stone that it has become part of the structure itself. As consciousness returns like a slowly rising tide, the chosen undead becomes aware of sounds that pierce through the asylum's oppressive quiet. Somewhere in the distance, metal clangs against stone with the rhythm of purposeful movement. Footsteps echo through corridors that have known only the shuffle of the hollow for so long that the sound of deliberate stride seems almost miraculous. The voice that calls through the darkness belongs to someone who has not yet surrendered to the curse's embrace, though the strain in those words suggests a soul balanced on the very edge of despair. This is Oscar of Astora, a knight whose noble lineage and pure intentions have brought him to this place of the damned on a mission that borders on the impossible. Oscar speaks through the bars of the cell with the careful courtesy of one who remembers what it means to be human, though his words carry the weight of someone who has seen too much and understands too little about the forces that move in the darkness beyond mortal sight. He tells of prophecy, of ancient words that speak of an undead who will ring the bells of awakening and link the fire that keeps the world from falling into eternal night. The knight's own story is one of tragedy wrapped in noble purpose, for he comes from a line that has produced many chosen undead, each one failing in their appointed task until the burden fell to the next generation. His armor, though battered by countless encounters with the asylum's dangers, still bears the symbols of his house with pride, and his voice holds the kind of determination that comes only from those who understand that failure means more than personal death. It means the death of everything. Through the bars of the cell, Oscar passes the Estus flask, that miraculous vessel which holds within its crystalline structure the essence of liquid fire itself. This is no ordinary healing potion, but something far more profound, a connection to the bonfires that serve as anchors of stability in a world where death has lost its finality and hope flickers like a candle in an endless wind. The flask feels warm to the touch, its amber contents glowing with an inner light that seems to respond to the holder's proximity to despair. When consumed, the liquid fire flows through the body like liquid starlight, mending wounds that should be fatal and restoring strength that should be permanently lost. Yet this is not merely physical healing, but something deeper, a reminder that even in this cursed existence, there remains something worth preserving, something worth fighting for. Oscar also provides the dungeon key, that simple piece of worked metal that represents the first step toward freedom. Yet, as the knight explains with words heavy with portent, freedom from the asylum is not freedom from the curse. It is merely the beginning of a journey that will test every aspect of what remains of the chosen undead's humanity. The asylum itself is a marvel of practical cruelty, designed not merely to contain the undead, but to ensure that they remain contained regardless of their individual capabilities or determination. Its corridors twist and turn in ways that seem to defy architectural logic, while its chambers are filled with traps and guardians that have been specifically chosen to exploit the weaknesses that the curse of undeath brings with it. The hollow guards that patrol these passages were once men and women, much like those they now seek to destroy, their armor still bearing the insignia of the kingdom they once served with honor. Yet the curse has stripped away everything that once made them noble, leaving only the mechanical repetition of duty without understanding, violence without purpose. As the chosen undead makes their way through the asylum's treacherous passages, they encounter their first taste of the combat that will define their existence. Each hollow that falls before their recovered blade is a small tragedy, a reminder of what they themselves might become if they allow the curse to claim their purpose. Yet there is also a strange mercy in these deaths, for each fallen hollow is finally released from the endless repetition of meaningless existence. The asylum's layout reveals the careful thought that went into its construction, for every corridor and chamber serves multiple purposes in containing and controlling its undead population. The narrow passages prevent large groups from forming, while the strategic placement of locked doors ensures that even the most determined escape attempt can be channeled into predictable patterns that the asylum's defenses can handle. Yet the chosen undead moves through these obstacles with a growing sense of capability that suggests their destiny was not assigned arbitrarily. Their blade finds its mark with increasing precision, their movements become more fluid and purposeful, and their understanding of combat tactics seems to emerge from some deep well of instinctual knowledge that the curse has not been able to touch. The encounter with the asylum demon represents far more than a simple test of combat prowess, though the creature's massive form and devastating attacks would be challenge enough for any warrior. This grotesque guardian, bloated and corrupted by its long vigil in the depths of the asylum, embodies everything that the curse of undeath represents: existence without beauty, power without nobility, strength without purpose. The demon's presence in the asylum is not coincidental, but represents the same cosmic forces that created the undead curse itself. Its massive form fills the chamber where it waits with the patience of something that has no concept of time passing. Its crude weapons and brutal attacks speaking to a kind of evil that finds joy in nothing but the destruction of anything that still carries the spark of hope or determination. When the chosen undead first encounters this monstrosity, the smart choice, perhaps the only choice for survival, is retreat. The narrow ledges and crumbling architecture of the demon's lair provide opportunities for those clever enough to exploit them, allowing even a relatively inexperienced warrior to find advantages against an opponent whose size and strength would otherwise make victory impossible. Yet even in retreat, even in the tactical withdrawal that wisdom dictates, there is something significant happening. The chosen undead is learning, adapting, growing in capability and understanding with each encounter. They are becoming what the prophecy foretold, though they do not yet understand what that transformation will ultimately cost them. The final confrontation with the asylum demon, when it comes, is both climactic and strangely hollow. The creature falls with a sound like crumbling stone, its massive form dissolving into the same dark essence from which it was formed. Yet this victory brings no lasting joy, for it is merely the first of countless such battles that await in the world beyond the asylum's walls. When the great doors of the northern undead asylum finally swing open, revealing the dying world of Lordran spread out like a vast tapestry of ruins and faded glory, the chosen undead steps into their destiny with no understanding of what that destiny truly means. The sky above is the color of old bone, perpetually overcast with clouds that seem to press down upon the world like a burial shroud. In the distance, the spires of ancient cities rise like broken teeth from landscapes that speak of glories long faded and hopes long abandoned. The journey to Firelink Shrine is both a pilgrimage and a descent, leading downward from the asylum's mountain perch into the heart of a world that grows more strange and terrible with each step. The path winds through ruins so old that their original purpose has been forgotten, past monuments to victories that no longer matter, and defeats that time has rendered meaningless. Firelink Shrine itself, when it finally comes into view, represents both sanctuary and sadness in equal measure. The ancient structure rises from the landscape like a prayer carved in stone, its graceful arches and flowing lines speaking of a time when beauty and hope were not strangers to this world. Yet for all its architectural majesty, the shrine feels empty, hollow like a great cathedral built to honor a god who no longer answers prayers. The bonfire that burns at the shrine's heart is perhaps the most beautiful and terrible thing in all of Lordran, for it represents both salvation and damnation wrapped in flickering flame. Its light provides comfort and healing to the undead who gather around it. Yet it also serves as an anchor that binds them to their cursed existence, preventing even the final escape that true death might provide. Here, beside this eternal flame, the chosen undead encounters the crestfallen warrior, a figure who embodies all the tragedy and wisdom that comes from too much understanding paired with too little hope. This hollow knight has sat beside the bonfire for so long that he has become part of the shrine's fixtures, his presence as permanent and reliable as the stones themselves. The crestfallen warrior speaks with the voice of someone who has seen too much and hoped too often, his words carrying the bitter wisdom of repeated disappointment. He tells of other chosen undead who have come before, all filled with the same determination and purpose, all ultimately failing in their appointed task. His warnings are born not from malice, but from a kind of protective despair, the desire to spare others from the hope that he knows will ultimately be crushed. Yet, even in his despair, the crestfallen warrior serves a crucial purpose, for his presence at Firelink Shrine provides the guidance that new undead desperately need. His directions to the bells of awakening, his warnings about the dangers that wait in the darkness, his bitter observations about the nature of the undead curse. All of these serve to prepare the chosen undead for the trials that await. As night falls over Lordran, bringing with it the sounds of distant horrors and the whispered promises of madness that echo through the ruins, the chosen undead rests beside the bonfire at Firelink Shrine. The flames dance with hypnotic beauty, their light pushing back the darkness that presses in from all sides like a living thing. In this moment of relative peace, surrounded by the ancient stones and watched over by the melancholy figure of the crestfallen warrior, the great journey truly begins. The curse that flows through their veins is no longer merely a burden to be endured, but the first stirring of something that might, with enough determination and sacrifice, reshape the very foundations of the world. They are the chosen undead, though they do not yet understand what that choice will demand of them, or what it might ultimately accomplish. They have escaped the asylum, reached the shrine, and taken the first steps on a path that will lead them to the very heart of existence itself. Tomorrow, they will ring the bells of awakening and begin the work of gathering the Lord's souls. Tonight, they rest beside the eternal flame, gathering strength for trials they cannot imagine and preparing for choices that will echo through the ages. The journey has begun, and there is no path but forward into whatever darkness or light awaits. When dawn breaks over Firelink Shrine, it brings with it not the golden light of hope, but the pale illumination of a sun that seems to struggle against the dying of the world itself. The chosen undead awakens beside the bonfire with the weight of destiny pressing down upon their shoulders like a mantle woven from the expectations of ages past and the desperate needs of a future that may never come to pass. The crestfallen warrior still sits in his accustomed place, his hollow gaze fixed upon the flames with the kind of attention that comes from having nothing else left to contemplate. His voice, when he speaks, carries the dusty wisdom of someone who has watched too many heroes depart on quests they would never complete, too many chosen undead march confidently into darkness from which they would never return. The bells of awakening, he explains with the patience of someone who has delivered this same speech countless times before, wait in the heights and depths of Lordran, like ancient sentinels guarding secrets that the world has tried desperately to forget. One bell hangs in the tower above the undead parish, where the faithful once gathered to worship gods who no longer answer their prayers. The other rests far below in the domain of Quelag, a creature whose very name has become synonymous with the kind of beauty that kills and the kind of power that corrupts everything it touches. The prophecy speaks of these bells with the vague authority of all ancient texts, promising that their ringing will awaken something that has slept for far too long, though it remains carefully silent about whether that awakening will bring salvation or merely hasten the world's descent into final darkness. The crestfallen warrior's bitter laugh suggests he has his own opinions about which outcome is more likely, though he keeps those darker thoughts to himself out of what might charitably be called mercy. The path to the undead parish leads through territories that have become synonymous with suffering and despair, past the ruins of settlements, where the living once went about their daily business without the constant awareness of mortality that defines existence in this dying age. The Burg, as the locals still call it, though few locals remain to use the name, sprawls across the hillside like a wound that has never properly healed, its buildings still standing but empty of everything that once gave them meaning. Here, among the narrow streets and crumbling battlements, the chosen undead encounters their first true taste of what the world has become. The hollow soldiers that patrol these ruins were once the kingdom's proud defenders, their armor still bearing the heraldry of noble houses and righteous causes. Yet the curse has stripped away everything that once made them admirable, leaving only the mechanical repetition of duties they no longer understand, in service of purposes they can no longer remember. Each battle fought in these twisted streets is both a small tragedy and a necessary step forward. For these hollow warriors represent what the chosen undead themselves might become if they allow their purpose to fade or their determination to waver. The blade that cuts them down offers them the closest thing to mercy that this world can provide, an end to the endless repetition of meaningless existence, a release from the prison of consciousness without hope. Yet even in this landscape of despair, there are moments of unexpected beauty that serve as reminders of what the world once was and what it might become again. A garden grows wild in the courtyard of a ruined house, its flowers blooming with stubborn persistence, despite the lack of anyone to tend them. A fountain still plays in a forgotten square, its clear water catching what little sunlight manages to penetrate the perpetual overcast that has become the world's natural state. The encounter with the tourist demon on the bridge leading toward the parish serves as both obstacle and lesson, for this massive creature embodies the same principle that governs so much of existence in Lordran, that overwhelming force can sometimes be overcome through cunning and persistence rather than matching strength with strength. The demon's massive form and devastating attacks would make it unbeatable in direct confrontation. Yet the crumbling tower that overlooks the bridge provides opportunities for those clever enough to recognize them. This battle, like so many others that await in the world beyond, becomes a meditation on the nature of power and the ways in which intelligence can triumph over brute force when applied with sufficient creativity and determination. The chosen undead learns not just how to fight but how to think, not just how to survive but how to find advantages in situations that appear hopeless to less imaginative minds. The path beyond the bridge leads through territories that grow stranger and more wonderful with each step, past ruins that speak of architectural ambitions that modern builders could never hope to match, and through forests where the very trees seem to whisper with voices from ages long past. The air itself carries scents and sounds that exist nowhere else in the world, the mingled fragrances of incense that burned in temples destroyed before recorded history began, the distant echoes of songs sung by choirs whose voices have been stilled for centuries. It is in this landscape of faded wonders that the chosen undead encounters one of the most significant figures they will meet in all their travels, Solaire of Astora, the knight whose devotion to an ideal has sustained him through trials that would have broken lesser souls. His appearance comes like sunlight breaking through storm clouds, his distinctive armor gleaming with care and attention that speaks of someone who has never forgotten what it means to take pride in one's appearance and purpose. Solaire's greeting carries the warmth of genuine fellowship, a quality so rare in this world of hollow warriors and lost souls that it strikes the ear like music after a long silence. His words speak of cooperation and mutual support, of the bonds that can form between undead who have not yet surrendered to the despair that claims so many of their cursed brethren. In a realm where trust has become as rare as hope and friendship as precious as the rarest treasure, Solaire's offered companionship represents a gift beyond measure. The knight's philosophy of jolly cooperation extends far beyond mere tactical alliance, though the practical benefits of fighting alongside a skilled and reliable partner cannot be understated. Rather, it represents a fundamental rejection of the isolation and despair that the undead curse seeks to impose upon its victims. By maintaining bonds of friendship and mutual support, by continuing to care about the welfare of others even when their own existence has become questionable, the undead can resist the slow erosion of humanity that inevitably leads to hollowing. Solaire's quest to find his own son serves as both inspiration and warning to those who travel alongside him, for his dedication to this seemingly impossible goal demonstrates the power of having something to strive for beyond mere survival. Yet there is also something troubling in his single-minded devotion. a hint that even the noblest purposes can become obsessions that lead their bearers away from the very virtues they sought to embody. Together, the chosen undead and Solaire make their way toward the undead parish through territories that test both their individual skills and their ability to work in harmony. The hollow soldiers that guard the approaches to the sacred precincts fight with the desperate fury of those who have been given one final purpose to fulfill: their coordinated attacks and tactical awareness, suggesting that some fragment of their former training remains accessible, despite the curse's ravages. The parish itself, when it finally comes into view, represents both the pinnacle of human architectural achievement and the depths of spiritual desolation. The great cathedral rises toward the heavens with lines of such perfect proportion and grace that they seem to have been designed by minds that understood the mathematical relationships underlying all beauty. Yet the building's perfection only serves to emphasize the emptiness that has claimed it, the absence of the faithful who once filled its halls with prayers and songs of praise. The bell gargoyles that guard the tower above the cathedral are creatures of such magnificent horror that they seem to have been crafted by artisans who understood that true terror lies not in mere ugliness, but in the corruption of beauty itself. Their stone wings spread with mechanical precision, while their eyes burn with fires that speak of intelligence wedded to malice, purpose devoted entirely to destruction. The battle that takes place on the cathedral's rooftop unfolds like a deadly ballet performed against a backdrop of architectural wonder and spiritual decay. The narrow confines of the bell tower create an arena where every movement must be calculated, and every mistake carries the potential for catastrophe. Yet it is precisely these constraints that make victory possible, for they limit the gargoyles' natural advantages while providing opportunities for warriors clever enough to exploit them. When the first gargoyle falls, its stone form crumbling into dust that is carried away by winds that have blown across this tower for centuries uncounted, the battle is far from over. The second creature rises with the fury of something that has been denied its purpose, its attacks becoming more desperate and dangerous as it fights not just for victory, but for the continuation of its very existence. The ringing of the first bell, when it finally comes, sends sound waves cascading across all of Lordran, like the voice of some ancient god awakening from slumber. The deep, resonant tones carry within them harmonics that seem to speak directly to the soul, bypassing the ears entirely to resonate in chambers of consciousness that most people never knew existed. Every creature in the kingdom, from the mightiest lords to the most pitiful hollow, hears this sound and understands on some fundamental level that something significant has changed in the very fabric of reality itself. Yet the ringing of one bell, momentous as it may be, represents only half of the task that fate has assigned to the chosen undead. The second bell waits in depths that few have explored and fewer still have survived, in domains where the very air carries poison and the ground beneath one's feet cannot be trusted to remain solid from one moment to the next. The descent toward those depths begins innocently enough, with a journey through sewers that were once marvels of engineering designed to carry away the waste of a great city. Yet these tunnels, like everything else in Lordran, have been transformed by forces that care nothing for human comfort or convenience. The water that once flowed clean and clear now carries contaminants that can kill with a touch, while the walls weep with moisture that burns like acid and glows with its own sickly phosphorescence. In these depths, the chosen undead encounters Laurentius of the Great Swamp, a pyromancer whose gentle demeanor and scholarly bearing seem utterly at odds with the destructive power he commands. His presence in these foul tunnels speaks to the strange paths that fate carves through the world, bringing together souls who might otherwise never have met, and forging alliances that transcend the boundaries of class and culture. Laurentius speaks of fire with the reverence that others reserve for discussing their dearest loved ones, his words carrying the deep understanding that comes from a lifetime devoted to mastering forces that most people fear to even contemplate. The flame that dances in his palm responds to his will with the obedience of a faithful pet, yet there is something in his eyes that suggests he understands the terrible responsibility that comes with such power. The art of pyromancy, as Laurentius explains it, represents far more than mere magical technique or scholarly pursuit. It is a philosophy of existence that embraces the fundamental truth that all life is fire-bright, beautiful, consuming, and ultimately finite. To master flame is to understand the nature of existence itself, to accept both the creative and destructive aspects of the force that animates all living things. Yet even as Laurentius shares the secrets of his art with generous spirit, there are warnings woven into his teachings like threads of darkness through bright cloth. Fire, he cautions, is a servant that can easily become a master if its wielder lacks the wisdom and discipline necessary to maintain control. The history of Lordran itself provides ample evidence of what happens when those who command flame allow their ambition to exceed their understanding. The journey deeper into the earth leads through chambers that seem to exist outside the normal flow of time and space, where the architecture follows rules that have more to do with nightmare than engineering. The depths, as this region has come to be known, represent humanity's descent not just into the physical underground, but into the psychological territories of primal fear and existential dread. Here, in tunnels that seem to have been carved by creatures that understood nothing of human needs or preferences, the chosen undead encounters horrors that challenge both physical prowess and mental fortitude. The basilisks that lurk in the deeper chambers possess a gaze that can turn living flesh to stone, their bulbous eyes radiating a power that bypasses all conventional defenses to strike directly at the soul itself. The curse of petrification that these creatures carry represents yet another variation on the theme of existence denied its natural conclusion, another way in which the fundamental order of life and death has been disrupted by forces that care nothing for the suffering they inflict. Those who fall victim to the basilisk's gaze find themselves trapped in stone shells that preserve their consciousness while denying them any ability to act upon the world around them. The gaping dragon that rules over the deepest chambers of this underground realm embodies gluttony elevated to the level of cosmic principle, its massive form swollen to impossible proportions by appetites that no amount of consumption can satisfy. This creature, which may once have been a dragon of noble bearing and magnificent power, has been transformed by its own excesses into something that exists only to devour, only to consume, only to expand its already grotesque bulk through the incorporation of everything it encounters. The battle with this monstrosity takes place in chambers that echo with the sounds of digestion, where the very walls seem to pulse with the rhythm of some vast alimentary system. The dragon's attacks are motivated not by malice or territorial instinct, but by simple, overwhelming hunger, the desire to incorporate everything it sees into the mass of its own ever-expanding body. Yet even this degraded creature retains enough of its draconic heritage to present a formidable challenge to any warrior brave enough or foolish enough to face it in combat. Its massive size allows it to attack from multiple directions simultaneously, while its acidic breath can dissolve armor and flesh with equal efficiency. The victory, when it finally comes, brings no sense of triumph, only the hollow satisfaction of having removed one more obstacle from the path toward whatever fate awaits in the depths below. The transition from the depths to Blighttown represents a descent not merely in physical terms, but into territories that exist at the very boundaries of what human consciousness can process and survive. The ramshackle platforms and rope bridges that constitute this vertical slum seem to defy every principle of sound construction, their existence maintained through some combination of desperate necessity and miraculous fortune. The air in Blighttown carries poison in forms both subtle and obvious, from the obvious green clouds that billow up from the swamp below to the more insidious toxins that seep through clothing and skin to corrupt the blood itself. Every breath taken in this place carries with it the risk of contamination. Every surface touched might leave its mark in the form of infection that spreads through the body like liquid fire. The inhabitants of this vertical hell have adapted to their environment in ways that speak to both human resilience and human degradation. The blow-dart snipers that lurk on distant platforms have learned to use the poison that saturates their world as a weapon, their projectiles carrying doses of toxin that can fell even the strongest warrior. The giant mosquitoes that swarm through the humid air move with the lazy confidence of predators that have never known anything but abundant prey. Yet even in this place of ultimate degradation, there are pockets of beauty that shine like jewels against a background of urban decay. The bonfires that burn on certain platforms provide not only healing and respite but also moments of connection with other travelers who have somehow found the courage to venture into these depths. The views that open up between the ramshackle buildings reveal vistas of the swamp below that possess their own twisted grandeur, landscapes that speak to the savage beauty that can emerge when civilization collapses and nature begins the work of reclamation. The great water wheel that dominates the lower reaches of Blighttown turns with the patient persistence of a mechanism that has outlasted its creators and will likely outlast anyone who observes its motion. Its massive wooden spokes creak with the accumulated fatigue of ages. Yet it continues to turn, continues to fulfill whatever purpose it was originally designed to serve, even though the civilization that built it has long since crumbled into dust. The descent to the swamp floor represents the final stage of a journey that began in the heights above the cathedral and now reaches its conclusion in depths where the very concept of elevation becomes meaningless. The water that covers the ground carries poison in concentrations that make every step a calculated risk, while the twisted trees that rise from this toxic soup reach toward a sky they can never hope to touch with branches that seem to writhe in pain. It is here, in the heart of this poisoned realm, that the chosen undead finally encounters Quelag, the creature whose name has become synonymous with the kind of beauty that destroys and the kind of power that corrupts everything it touches. Her appearance defies easy description, for she represents the fusion of human grace and arachnid horror in proportions that seem designed to challenge the observer's ability to process conflicting sensations of attraction and revulsion. The upper portion of her form retains the beauty that marked her as one of the Witch of Izalith's daughters, her features carved with the kind of perfection that speaks to divine rather than mortal craftsmanship. Yet this beauty rises from a spider's body of such magnificent horror that it seems to embody every nightmare that has ever featured creatures of the deep earth and the dark spaces between human understanding. Quelag's lair reflects her dual nature, combining elements of refined aesthetics with practical adaptations to an environment that exists at the intersection of beauty and terror. The webs that span the cavern's upper reaches glisten with moisture that might be morning dew or might be something far more sinister, while the floor beneath shifts between solid rock and pools of lava that glow with their own internal light. The battle with Quelag unfolds like a dance choreographed by madness itself. Her movements, combining the fluid grace of her human heritage with the alien efficiency of her arachnid body. Her attacks flow from sword strikes that could have been performed in the most refined court to gouts of lava that speak to powers drawn from the very heart of the earth itself. She is both warrior and force of nature, both person and elemental power, both individual and cosmic principle made manifest. Yet beneath the horror and the deadly beauty, there are hints of tragedy that speak to the person she once was before the transformation that claimed her. The way she moves sometimes suggests weariness rather than aggression, while her attacks carry within them echoes of techniques learned in more civilized times for more noble purposes. She is not evil in any simple sense, but rather the victim of changes that exceeded her ability to control or understand. When Quelag finally falls, her death brings not triumph, but a strange mixture of relief and sorrow that speaks to the complex emotions that define so many encounters in this dying world. The second bell that rings from her domain sends its voice up through all the layers of stone and earth to join its harmony with the first, creating a chord that resonates through the very foundations of reality itself. The ringing of both bells together awakens something that has slumbered for so long that most of the world has forgotten its existence entirely. Deep beneath the foundations of Lordran, in chambers that exist at the intersection of architecture and geology, ancient mechanisms begin to move with the slow persistence of forces that measure time in geological rather than human terms. The path to Sen's fortress, that deadly maze which guards the approach to the gods themselves, swings open like a door that has waited centuries for someone worthy to pass through it. As the chosen undead stands in the aftermath of these great ringings, surrounded by the fading echoes of sounds that have traveled through every corner of the kingdom and beyond, they can feel the weight of destiny settling upon their shoulders with new intensity. The bells have been rung, the ancient mechanisms have been awakened, and the path forward has been revealed. Yet with each step taken toward their appointed fate, the questions multiply rather than resolve. What power sleeps beneath Lordran that required such elaborate keys to awaken it? What purpose drives the ancient mechanisms that have begun to move in response to the bell's call? What fate awaits those brave enough or foolish enough to walk the path that has been opened by their actions? The answers lie ahead, hidden in territories that few have explored and fewer still have survived, in the realm of the gods themselves, where truth and deception dance together in patterns too complex for mortal minds to unravel. The journey toward those answers begins now, as the great fortress that guards the approaches to divinity itself swings open its gates to admit one more seeker of truth into its deadly embrace. The bells have been rung, the way has been opened, and the real adventure is about to begin. The awakening of Sen's fortress marks a turning point in the chosen undead's journey that extends far beyond the merely practical matter of accessing previously forbidden territory. This ancient structure, which has stood sentinel over the approaches to Unraveled for centuries uncounted, represents the transition from the mortal realm of struggle and suffering into the divine sphere, where gods walk among architectural marvels that dwarf human imagination and cosmic forces play out their eternal games of power and deception. The fortress itself defies easy categorization, for it exists simultaneously as military installation, proving ground, and work of art created by minds that understood the relationship between function and beauty in ways that modern builders can only dream of achieving. Every stone has been placed with deliberate precision, every corridor designed to serve multiple purposes, every trap crafted with the kind of attention to detail that speaks of creators who measured their success not merely in terms of effectiveness, but in terms of elegant execution. Sen's fortress earned its grim reputation through centuries of claiming the lives of heroes and would-be champions who believed their skills sufficient to overcome its challenges. The bones that litter its passages belong not to the weak or cowardly, but to warriors of genuine ability whose confidence exceeded their wisdom. Each skeleton represents a story of courage that ended in tragedy, a tale of someone who ventured into these halls believing they were destined for greatness, only to discover that destiny makes no promises about comfortable conclusions. The fortress operates according to principles that blend mechanical engineering with a philosophy of testing that goes far beyond simple measures of combat prowess or physical endurance. Its trials are designed to evaluate not just what a challenger can do, but who they are at the deepest levels of character and determination. The traps that swing down from hidden recesses in the ceiling strike not randomly, but in patterns that reward careful observation and punish hasty action. The narrow bridges that span bottomless chasms test not just balance but the ability to maintain composure when death yawns beneath every footstep. Yet perhaps the most insidious aspect of Sen's fortress lies not in its obvious dangers, but in the way it gradually wears down the resolve of those who navigate its passages. The constant vigilance required to avoid the swinging blades and crushing weights creates a state of mental exhaustion that accumulates like poison in the bloodstream. Heroes who enter these halls with confidence intact find themselves second-guessing every decision, questioning every instinct, wondering if the next step will be their last. The chosen Undead's passage through this proving ground unfolds like a meditation on the nature of persistence in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. Each trap survived represents not just tactical success, but a small victory over the doubt and despair that the fortress seeks to instill in all who challenge its authority. The narrow walkways that demand perfect balance become lessons in maintaining focus despite distraction, while the puzzles that guard essential passages teach the value of careful thought over impulsive action. The serpent men that inhabit the fortress's upper reaches represent the kind of enemy that nightmares are made of. Their sinuous forms, moving with predatory grace, while their weapons strike with surgical precision. These creatures, which seem to exist at the intersection of reptilian instinct and human intelligence, guard the fortress not out of loyalty or duty, but from some deeper compulsion that makes them perfect sentinels for a place designed to test the worthiness of those who would approach the gods themselves. The encounter with these serpentine guardians becomes a dance of death performed on stages that shift and change according to rules that only the fortress itself fully understands. The narrow passages that connect different sections of the structure funnel combat into patterns that favor defenders who know the terrain over attackers, who must improvise their tactics based on incomplete information. Each victory against these formidable opponents represents not just superior fighting skill, but superior adaptability in the face of constantly changing circumstances. The great contraptions that dominate the fortress's central chambers operate with the patient persistence of mechanisms that have outlasted their creators and will likely outlast anyone who observes their motion. The massive stones that swing through predetermined arcs carry within their movement the accumulated momentum of centuries, their paths worn smooth by endless repetition, yet still capable of crushing anyone foolish enough to miscalculate their timing. These mechanical marvels serve purposes that extend beyond their obvious function as obstacles for ambitious heroes to overcome. They represent the embodiment of order imposed upon chaos, of predictable patterns that create islands of stability in a world where most things have succumbed to decay and corruption. The fortress operates according to its original design despite the collapse of the civilization that created it, its mechanisms maintained by forces that care nothing for the politics or philosophies that motivated its construction. The iron golem that guards the fortress's highest reaches embodies the same principle writ large, a construct of such massive proportions that it seems more like a moving mountain than a conventional guardian. Its form speaks to the ambitions of creators who thought in terms of geological rather than human scale, builders who designed their protector to inspire awe through sheer size as much as through combat effectiveness. The battle with this colossus takes place on platforms that seem to float in empty air, surrounded by views that stretch to the horizons of the known world and beyond. From this vantage point, the landscape of Lordran spreads out like a map drawn by gods, revealing the true scope of the kingdom that the chosen undead has been traversing and hinting at territories that lie beyond the reach of normal exploration. The iron golem itself moves with the deliberate precision of something that has never known defeat, its massive fists creating shockwaves that can shatter stone, and its footsteps registering as minor earthquakes on instruments that might exist to measure such things. Yet for all its intimidating presence, this guardian operates according to principles that careful observation can decode and strategic thinking can exploit. The key to victory lies not in matching strength with strength, but in understanding the relationship between power and balance that governs the golem's movement. Its massive size, which provides such overwhelming advantages in terms of raw destructive capability, also creates vulnerabilities that a sufficiently clever opponent can exploit. The same mechanisms that give it the ability to deliver devastating attacks also make it susceptible to techniques that turn its own momentum against it. When the iron golem finally falls, its massive form toppling from the platform where it has stood guard for centuries uncounted, the sound of its impact echoes through valleys that have not heard such noise since the world was young. Its destruction marks not just the removal of an obstacle, but the completion of a trial that few have survived and fewer still have understood in all its implications. The demons that appear to carry the victorious chosen undead to Anor Londo arrive like servants of forces too vast and complex for mortal minds to fully comprehend. These winged creatures, whose forms suggest bat and gargoyle and nightmare made manifest, serve purposes that extend far beyond simple transportation. Their appearance at this precise moment speaks to the operation of cosmic mechanisms that have been waiting for someone to prove themselves worthy of divine attention. The flight to Anor Londo unfolds like a journey between worlds, rather than a simple change of geographical location. The landscape that passes beneath the demon's wings shifts from the familiar territories of mortal struggle into realms where the very laws of physics seem to operate according to different principles. The air grows thinner and cleaner, carrying scents of something that might be called holiness, if such concepts had meaning in a world where gods walk the earth and divine power shapes reality according to will rather than natural law. Anor Londo itself, when it finally rises into view, represents the pinnacle of architectural achievement, elevated to the level of divine art. The city of the gods stretches across impossible distances, its spires reaching toward heights that seem to pierce the very heavens, while its foundations anchor themselves in bedrock that extends down to the core of the world itself. Every line of its construction speaks to minds that understood beauty not as human aesthetic preference but as mathematical principle embedded in the fundamental structure of reality. The golden light that bathes every surface of this magnificent city creates an atmosphere that exists somewhere between dawn and eternal noon, a perpetual moment of perfect illumination that banishes shadows and reveals every detail with crystalline clarity. This light carries within it qualities that transcend mere photons and wavelengths, touching the souls of those who experience it with something that might be called benediction, if the concept were not so inadequate to describe the actual sensation. The streets of Anor Londo stretch before the chosen undead, like pathways through a dream of perfect order, their stones fitted together with such precision that no gaps exist for weeds to take root or weather to create wear. The buildings that line these thoroughfares rise with proportions that satisfy some deep aesthetic sense that most mortals possess, but rarely have the opportunity to experience in its pure form. Every arch, every column, every decorative element serves not only its immediate function but contributes to a greater harmony that makes the entire city a single work of art executed on a scale that dwarfs human imagination. Yet for all its beauty, for all its evident divinity, there is something troubling about Londo that becomes apparent to those who explore its streets with sufficient attention and wisdom. The city feels empty in ways that go beyond mere absence of population, hollow in ways that architectural magnificence cannot fill. The perfect proportions and divine illumination serve to emphasize, rather than conceal, the fundamental loneliness that pervades every corner of this supposed paradise. The silver knights that patrol the city's ramparts and galleries move with mechanical precision that speaks to duty elevated to the level of religious observance. These warriors, whose armor gleams with light that seems to emanate from within the metal itself, represent the ideal of martial perfection wedded to absolute loyalty. Their movements flow with liquid grace while their weapons strike with surgical precision, each gesture calculated to achieve maximum effectiveness with minimum waste of motion. Yet there is something troubling about these perfect guardians, something that becomes apparent to those who observe them with sufficient care and understanding. They perform their duties with the same mechanical repetition that characterizes the hollow soldiers found in the mortal realm, though their preservation of skill and purpose marks them as fundamentally different from those who have succumbed to the curse of undeath. They are not hollow, but they are not truly alive either, existing in some intermediate state that serves the city's needs while raising questions about the nature of existence in this divine realm. The cathedral that dominates Londo's central district represents religious architecture elevated to the level of cosmic statement, its flying buttresses and soaring vaults creating interior spaces that seem to contain infinities within finite dimensions. The light that streams through its stained glass windows carries colors that exist nowhere else in the spectrum, hues that speak directly to the soul, without requiring interpretation by the eye or brain. It is within this sacred space that the chosen undead finally encounters Princess Guinevere, whose presence transforms the already magnificent cathedral into something that transcends architecture entirely and becomes pure experience of divine beauty made manifest. Her form defies description not because it is strange or alien, but because it embodies perfection so complete that mortal senses struggle to process it without being overwhelmed by sensations that border on ecstasy. Guinevere speaks with a voice that carries within it the music of spheres, each word resonating in frequencies that touch the listener's consciousness at levels deeper than mere hearing can reach. Her words of greeting and blessing flow like honey mixed with starlight, sweet with promises of purpose and meaning that the chosen undead has sought throughout their journey across the dying world below. The Lord vessel that she bestows upon the worthy challenger represents far more than a simple container for the souls of mighty beings. This chalice, carved from materials that exist at the intersection of matter and spirit, embodies the relationship between mortal action and cosmic consequence that defines the true nature of heroism. Its weight in the hands speaks not to its physical mass, but to the burden of responsibility that comes with the power to reshape reality itself. The task that Guinevere sets before the chosen undead appears straightforward in its basic requirements: gather the Lord's souls of the four great beings who possess fragments of the original flame and return them to this vessel so that the linking of the fire might be accomplished. Yet the simplicity of this directive conceals complexities that will test not only combat prowess and navigational skill, but the very foundations of moral judgment and cosmic understanding. Each Lord Soul represents not just a source of power, but a story of how that power has been used and misused across the ages since the first flame brought light to a world of endless grey. The beings who possess these souls have become what they are through choices that seemed reasonable at the time but led to consequences that no one could have foreseen. Their defeats will require not just martial victory, but understanding of the tragic circumstances that transformed them from heroes into obstacles that must be overcome. The revelation of the chosen undead's true purpose to serve as fuel for the linking of the fire that keeps the age of gods burning bright comes wrapped in language so beautiful and compelling that its full implications require careful consideration to understand. Guinevere's words paint this sacrifice as the ultimate expression of heroism, the final gift that a worthy soul can offer to preserve the light that holds back the encroaching darkness. Yet there are hints, subtle but persistent, that this glorious destiny carries with it questions that the princess does not address, and implications that she does not acknowledge. The very magnificence of her presentation, the overwhelming beauty of her presence, the compelling power of her words, all of these create an atmosphere that encourages acceptance without examination, faith without doubt, commitment without full understanding of what that commitment entails. The optional encounter with Dark Sun Gwyndolin, hidden beneath the cathedral in chambers that exist in perpetual twilight, provides glimpses of truth that complicate the simple narrative that Guinevere has presented. This pale god of the dark moon speaks in whispers that carry more honesty than all of Guinevere's golden proclamations, his words revealing layers of deception and misdirection that have shaped the chosen undead's journey from its very beginning. Gwyndolin's chamber exists in a realm that seems to stretch beyond the physical boundaries of the cathedral above, its dimensions following rules that have more to do with symbolic meaning than architectural engineering. The pale light that illuminates this sacred space carries within it qualities of moonlight and starshine, creating an atmosphere of contemplative mystery that contrasts sharply with the overwhelming radiance that characterizes the rest of Anor Londo. The god who rules this twilight realm moves with ethereal grace that speaks to divine nature wedded to profound loneliness, his serpentine lower body carrying him through spaces that seem designed for someone who exists partially outside the normal flow of physical reality. His attacks, when they come, combine sorcery and archery in patterns that create deadly beauty, each spell and arrow carrying within it the accumulated power of ages spent in solitary contemplation of cosmic mysteries. Yet even in combat, even when defending secrets that have shaped the fate of kingdoms, Gwyndolin's manner suggests sadness rather than anger, resignation rather than rage. He fights not because he desires conflict, but because duty demands it, not because he hates those who challenge him, but because the cosmic order requires certain truths to remain hidden until the proper time for their revelation arrives. The victory over this melancholy deity brings not triumph, but a strange mixture of accomplishment and regret that characterizes so many encounters in this world, where heroes and villains exist in shades of grey rather than clear, distinctions of black and white. Gwyndolin's defeat reveals not just the illusions that have shaped the chosen undead's perception of Anor Londo, but the desperate measures that the gods have taken to maintain their power in a world that no longer supports their power, continued existence. The return to Firelink Shrine, after the revelations of Anor Londo, carries with it a weight of knowledge that transforms familiar surroundings into something strange and ominous. The bonfire that once provided comfort and healing now raises questions about the true nature of the flame that it embodies, while the crestfallen warrior's bitter observations take on new meaning in light of the cosmic deceptions that have been revealed. King Seeker Framt, that ancient serpent whose counsel has guided so many chosen undead along the path toward their destined sacrifice, emerges from his slumber beneath the shrine with words of encouragement that ring hollow to ears that have learned to detect the spaces between truth and deception. His massive form coils through dimensions that seem to exist parallel to normal space, while his ancient eyes hold depths that speak to knowledge accumulated across spans of time that dwarf human history. The serpent's guidance toward the collection of the Lord's souls carries within it the same mixture of truth and misdirection that has characterized every aspect of the chosen undead's journey. His directions are accurate in their practical details. The locations can be found, the enemies can be defeated, the souls can be claimed. Yet the larger context that gives meaning to these actions remains carefully obscured, hidden behind language that emphasizes duty and destiny, while avoiding discussion of consequence and cost. The path that Framp describes leads through territories that represent not just geographical challenges but psychological and spiritual trials that will test every aspect of the chosen undead's character and determination. Each Lord's soul waits in domains that reflect the nature of its possessor, surrounded by environments that have been shaped by the same forces that transformed heroes into obstacles and dreams into nightmares. Yet even as the Serpent's counsel points toward the collection of these mighty souls, there are hints of alternative paths that exist beyond his knowledge or acknowledgement. The darkness that he speaks of with such fear and revulsion carries within it possibilities that his words do not address, potentials that his guidance actively discourages exploration of. The choice between light and dark, between preservation and change, between the known suffering of the present and the uncertain possibilities of the future, lurks beneath every conversation and shadows every decision. The chosen undead stands at Firelink's shrine with the weight of cosmic responsibility settling upon their shoulders like a mantle woven from the expectations of gods and the desperate needs of a dying world. The Lord Vessel rests heavy in their hands, its crystalline surface reflecting light that comes from sources beyond the physical bonfire around which they rest. The path forward has been clearly marked, the tasks have been explicitly defined, yet the questions that matter most remain carefully unanswered. What does it truly mean to link the fire? What price will be demanded of the one who performs this ultimate sacrifice? What alternatives exist for those brave enough to seek them out despite the warnings and prohibitions that surround such inquiries? The answers wait in the depths and heights of Lordran, hidden in domains where the lords themselves have become prisoners of their own choices, and the truth lies buried beneath centuries of self-deception and willful blindness. The real journey is about to begin, leading not just toward the collection of powerful souls but toward understanding of the fundamental questions that shape existence itself. The chosen undead has been given a purpose, but whether that purpose serves their best interests or merely the convenience of those who would use them remains to be discovered through trials that will test not just their strength but their wisdom, not just their courage, but their understanding of what courage truly means when the stakes are measured not in kingdoms, but in the very nature of reality itself. The path that leads toward the Duke's archives winds through territories that seem designed to remind travelers of the price that knowledge demands from those who seek it with insufficient wisdom or restraint. The crystal formations that jut from the landscape like frozen thoughts grow more numerous and elaborate as one approaches the seat of Seath's power, their translucent surfaces reflecting light in patterns that hurt the eyes and confuse the mind of anyone who stares too long into their prismatic depths. These crystalline growths represent more than mere geological curiosities, for they embody the physical manifestation of research that has transcended the boundaries of natural philosophy and entered realms where the distinction between discovery and creation becomes meaningless. Each formation pulses with its own inner light, a radiance that speaks to energies drawn from sources that exist beyond the normal spectrum of forces that govern the material world. The approach to the Duke's archives itself unfolds like a pilgrimage through the accumulated detritus of scholarly ambition carried too far beyond the boundaries of prudence or morality. The crystalline servants that guard the pathways move with mechanical precision that speaks to intelligence without wisdom, purpose without understanding, function divorced from any consideration of consequence or cost. These creatures, which might once have been human before their transformation into living embodiments of Seath's research, demonstrate the ultimate fate that awaits those who allow their pursuit of knowledge to override their concern for their own humanity. They retain enough of their original intelligence to serve as effective guardians while losing everything that once made them recognizably people, their crystalline shells preserving function while destroying identity. The Duke's archives themselves rise from the landscape like a monument to the kind of ambition that confuses accumulation with achievement, quantity with quality, possession with understanding. The countless towers and interconnected chambers speak to a mind that believed truth could be captured and contained through the simple expedient of gathering enough information, storing enough specimens, conducting enough experiments. Within these halls, the chosen undead encounters the remnants of scholarly apparatus that once served purposes both magnificent and terrible. Instruments designed to peer into the fundamental structure of reality itself, and tools created to manipulate forces that were never meant to be subject to mortal will. The empty cages that line the corridors speak to experiments whose subjects have either died or escaped, while the abandoned laboratory equipment suggests research projects that were abandoned not because they failed, but because they succeeded too well. The serpent men that inhabit the archive's upper reaches move through the scholarly apparatus with the familiarity of long residents, their scaled forms adapted to navigate spaces designed for minds that thought in terms of function rather than comfort. These creatures serve as both guardians and librarians, protecting knowledge that has become too dangerous for casual perusal, while maintaining records that document the progression from legitimate research into territories that defy moral and practical justification. Logan the Big Hat. When the chosen undead finally encounters this legendary sorcerer in his cage, overlooking the crystalline gardens below, represents both the pinnacle of magical achievement and the inevitable destination that awaits all those who mistake knowledge for wisdom. His presence in Seath's stronghold speaks to the seductive power that true understanding exercises over minds capable of appreciating its significance, the way that genuine discovery can become indistinguishable from obsession for those who lack the wisdom to know when to stop. Logan's words carry the authority of someone who has pushed the boundaries of sorcerous knowledge further than perhaps any mortal before him, his understanding of magical principles elevated to levels that border on the divine. Yet there is something troubling in his manner, a hunger that speaks to appetites that no amount of learning can satisfy, desires that grow stronger rather than weaker with each new revelation that falls within his grasp. The rescue of this imprisoned scholar becomes both mercy and catalyst, for Logan's freedom allows him to pursue research that will ultimately lead to his own destruction, while providing the chosen undead with access to sorceries that push the boundaries of what mortal minds should be capable of. Wielding. The spells that he teaches carry within them fragments of understanding, drawn from territories that exist beyond the normal boundaries of human knowledge. Insights that illuminate while they corrupt. The path through the Duke's archives unfolds like a journey through the mind of someone who has confused the map with the territory, the symbol with the reality, the description with the thing described. The endless corridors filled with books and scrolls create a maze of information that obscures, rather than illuminates, the fundamental truths that all this scholarship was originally intended to reveal. The mechanical contraptions that move books and specimens through the archive's various chambers operate with the persistence of systems that have outlasted their creator's ability to remember why such apparatus was originally considered necessary. These devices continue to perform their assigned functions despite the obvious fact that no one remains who understands the larger purposes they were designed to serve. The crystal caves that lie beneath the archives represent Seath's transformation of natural wonder into artificial horror, spaces where the pale dragon's obsession with immortality has reshaped the very structure of reality, according to principles that have more to do with madness than with any coherent philosophy of existence. The invisible pathways that span these crystalline abysses require not just courage to traverse, but faith in perceptions that the environment itself seems designed to undermine. Here, surrounded by formations that exist partially outside the normal flow of time and space, the accumulated weight of Seath's research becomes apparent in ways that transcend mere intellectual understanding. The air itself carries harmonics that speak to forces drawn from sources beyond the material world, while the light that reflects from countless crystalline surfaces creates patterns that bypass rational thought to strike directly at the deeper centers of consciousness. The encounter with Seath the Scaleless himself unfolds in chambers that represent the ultimate expression of knowledge divorced from wisdom, power separated from responsibility, achievement elevated above all consideration of cost or consequence. The pale dragon's massive form coils through spaces that seem to bend and shift according to his will, while his breath carries crystalline death that transforms living flesh into the same translucent matter that comprises his obsessive research. Seath's tragedy lies not in any single moment of corruption or fall from grace, but in the gradual process through which his legitimate desire for immortality transformed into something that destroyed everything he originally sought to preserve. His betrayal of his own kind during the ancient war against the dragons represents not evil in any simple sense, but rather the kind of moral blindness that comes when intellectual curiosity overrides all other considerations. The pale dragon's research into the nature of scales and the secrets of immortality began with understandable motivations. He alone among the everlasting dragons possessed no scales, no natural defense against the passage of time and the erosion that claims all living things. His alliance with the lords who ultimately destroyed his species represented a desperate attempt to find through cooperation what he could not achieve through his own nature. Yet the immortality that Seath achieved through his crystalline research proved to be a hollow victory that preserved existence while destroying everything that made that existence meaningful. His body, transformed by his own experiments into something that exists partially outside normal physical law, represents not triumph over mortality, but rather the kind of living death that comes when the fear of ending overrides all consideration of what makes life worth living. The battle with this tragic figure takes place in chambers filled with the accumulated apparatus of centuries spent in pursuit of impossible goals, surrounded by the crystalline formations that represent both his greatest achievements and the evidence of his ultimate failure. His attacks combine sorcery with the raw power of his draconic heritage, creating patterns of destruction that speak to intelligence wedded to desperation. When Seath finally falls, his death brings not the satisfaction of victory over evil, but rather the melancholy that comes from witnessing the end of someone who began with noble intentions and gradually lost their way through choices that seemed reasonable at the time, but led inevitably toward tragedy. The bequeathed Lord's soul shard that he yields carries within it not just power, but the accumulated weight of all the compromises and moral shortcuts that transformed a legitimate desire for survival into an obsession that destroyed everything it touched. The journey toward the second Lord Soul leads through territories that have been transformed by forces that represent the opposite extreme. From Seath's crystalline perfectionism here, in the demon ruins, and the domain that was once Izalith, the chosen undead encounters the consequences of good intentions carried beyond the boundaries of wisdom or restraint. The landscape itself bears the scars of magical experimentation, gone catastrophically wrong, where the very stones have been melted and reformed by temperatures that exceed anything that should exist in the natural world. The lava that flows through these twisted passages carries within it not just heat, but the residual magical energies of a spell that was meant to recreate the first flame, but instead gave birth to something far more terrible and uncontrollable. The demons that populate this hellish realm represent not servants of some cosmic evil, but rather the unintended consequences of magical research that exceeded its creator's ability to control or understand. Each creature embodies a different aspect of the chaos that was unleashed when the Witch of Izalith attempted to duplicate the cosmic forces that brought light to the world, their forms shaped by energies that follow no laws save those of destruction and endless propagation. The Capra demons that guard the approaches to the deeper ruins move with predatory grace that speaks to intelligence wedded to inexorable purpose, their massive forms combining human cunning with bestial fury, in proportions that create adversaries capable of adapting their tactics to exploit any weakness they detect. The narrow passages where they make their stands transform each encounter into a test not just of combat prowess, but of spatial awareness and tactical flexibility. The Taurus demons that roam the broader chambers represent brute force elevated to the level of natural disaster, their attacks capable of reshaping the architecture around them, while their mere presence creates zones of influence where normal rules of combat cease to apply. These creatures embody the kind of power that destroys through existence rather than intention, their every movement creating consequences that ripple outward to affect everything within their vicinity. Yet it is the smaller demons, the ones whose forms retain more obvious traces of their human origins, that prove most disturbing to encounter. These creatures, which might once have been the witch's disciples or servants, demonstrate what happens when magical experimentation claims not just the body but the soul itself, transforming willing participants in research into embodiments of the very forces they sought to understand. The architecture of the demon ruins reflects the same mixture of noble intention and catastrophic result that characterizes everything associated with the Witch of Izalith's failed experiment. The chambers and passages show evidence of careful planning and sophisticated engineering, spaces designed to contain and channel magical energies with the precision that only the most advanced practitioners of the art could achieve. Yet this same architecture has been twisted and corrupted by the forces it was meant to control. Walls melted and reformed by temperatures that no stone was ever meant to withstand. Floors cracked and split by energies that operate according to principles that have more to do with destruction than construction. The result is a landscape that speaks to the gap between intention and achievement, between the dream of controlling cosmic forces and the reality of what happens when such forces escape all attempts at containment. The deeper one ventures into these ruins, the more apparent it becomes that the catastrophe that claimed Izalith was not a single moment of magical failure, but rather a process that unfolded over time, gradually transforming a center of learning and research into a hellish realm where the very concepts of progress and civilization have lost all meaning. The evidence suggests that the witch and her daughters had time to understand what was happening to them, time to witness the transformation of their great work into something monstrous, yet lacked the ability to stop or reverse what they had set in motion. The encounter with the bed of chaos represents not a battle in any conventional sense, but rather a confrontation with the physical manifestation of magical forces that have grown beyond all possibility of control or understanding. This twisted tree-like entity embodies the ultimate destination that awaits all attempts to recreate or duplicate cosmic forces through mortal magic, its form speaking to growth without purpose, expansion without direction, life divorced from any organizing principle, save endless proliferation. The chamber where this monstrosity makes its lair stretches beyond normal architectural boundaries, its dimensions seeming to expand and contract according to principles that have more to do with the entity's internal rhythms than with any consistent relationship to physical space. The floor beneath constantly shifts and changes as roots and branches reshape the environment according to alien priorities that take no account of the needs or preferences of visitors. The battle itself unfolds as a desperate race against forces that seek not so much to destroy the chosen undead as to incorporate them into the same chaotic growth that has claimed everything else in this cursed realm. The entity's attacks follow patterns that seem random, but gradually reveal themselves to be expressions of an intelligence so alien that its logic cannot be comprehended by minds that think in terms of individual identity and discrete purpose. The destruction of the bed of chaos brings not triumph, but rather a profound sense of sadness for what might have been, for the great work that the Witch of Izalith originally intended, and the noble purposes that her research was meant to serve. The Lord's soul that her death yields carries within it not just power, but the accumulated weight of all the good intentions that paved the road to this particular hell. All the small compromises and rationalized shortcuts that led from legitimate magical research to the birth of chaos itself. The victory over these two Lord Soul possessors provides the chosen undead with power enough to face the remaining challenges that await. Yet each triumph carries with it knowledge that complicates rather than simplifies the moral landscape they must navigate. Seath's crystalline madness and the witch's chaotic transformation both represent cautionary tales about the dangers that await those who seek to transcend the natural boundaries of their existence. Yet both also demonstrate the tragic consequences that follow when legitimate desires for improvement and advancement are carried beyond the boundaries of wisdom or restraint. The Lord's souls themselves pulse with energies that speak to forces far greater than the individuals who possess them. Cosmic powers that were never meant to be contained within mortal forms yet, which found themselves trapped in flesh and consciousness that proved inadequate to their proper expression. Each soul carries within it fragments of the original flame that brought light to the world. Yet these fragments have been changed by their long imprisonment in beings who lacked the wisdom to wield them properly. As the chosen undead contemplates these mighty prizes, feeling the weight of cosmic power settling into their own mortal frame, questions multiply rather than resolve about the true nature of the task that has been set before them. If beings as mighty and well-intentioned as Seath and the Witch of Izalith could fall so far from their original purposes, what hope exists for someone who seeks to gather all such power into a single vessel? What safeguards exist to prevent the same tragic transformation from claiming yet another soul who believes themselves capable of wielding forces that have proven too great for anyone who has attempted to control them? The path toward the remaining Lord Souls stretches ahead through territories that promise revelations even more challenging than those already encountered. Domains where the remaining possessors of these cosmic fragments have found their own unique ways to be destroyed by the power they sought to preserve. The journey continues, carrying the chosen undead deeper into the fundamental questions that shape existence itself, closer to truths that may prove too terrible for mortal consciousness to survive intact. The descent into the catacombs begins not with a single step, but with a gradual transition from the familiar territories of the surface world into realms where the fundamental laws that govern life and death operate according to principles that challenge every assumption about the nature of existence itself. The air grows colder with each downward passage, carrying within it the scent of bone dust and ancient preservation that speaks to ages spent in the company of those who have crossed the threshold from which no natural return is possible. The architecture of these underground chambers reflects the work of minds that understood death not as ending but as transformation. Builders who designed their passages and galleries to serve the needs of inhabitants who no longer required warmth or comfort, or any of the amenities that make existence bearable for those still burdened with flesh and blood. The stones themselves seem to whisper with voices that have been stilled for centuries, their surfaces worn smooth by the passage of countless feet that no longer leave tracks in ordinary dust. The necromancers that inhabit these depths represent the ultimate expression of magical research carried into territories where the natural order itself becomes subject to manipulation and revision. These robed figures move through the darkness with the confidence of those who have made death itself their servant, their staffs glowing with energies that speak to forces drawn from sources that exist beyond the normal boundaries of mortal magic. Their mastery over the undead warriors that shamble through these corridors creates an ecosystem of sorts, a realm where the traditional relationship between ruler and subject has been replaced by something far more fundamental and terrible. The skeletal warriors that rise at their command possess just enough of their original fighting skills to present serious challenges to living opponents, while lacking entirely the capacity for independent thought or moral judgment that once made them recognizable as people. These bone warriors move with mechanical precision that speaks to consciousness reduced to its most basic components, their attacks following patterns that were learned in life, but are now executed without any understanding of purpose or context. They represent perhaps the most honest expression of what necromancy ultimately offers: existence without meaning, function without understanding, the preservation of capability, divorced from everything that once made that capability worth preserving. The deeper chambers of the catacombs reveal the true scope of the necromantic enterprise that has claimed this realm, where entire armies of the dead stand in formation waiting for commands that may never come from masters who have long since lost sight of whatever purposes originally motivated their research. The sight of these endless ranks of skeletal warriors creates an atmosphere of oppressive futility that weighs upon the living like a physical burden. Yet even in this realm of death and necromancy, there are pockets of something that might be called beauty, if one possessed the wisdom to recognize it, in forms so far removed from conventional aesthetic experience. The way light from the chosen undead's torch reflects from countless bone surfaces creates patterns of illumination that speak to mathematical principles underlying all beauty, while the perfect preservation of architectural details demonstrates the kind of craftsmanship that modern builders can only dream of achieving. The great wheel mechanisms that control access to the deepest levels of the catacombs operate with the patient persistence of devices that have outlasted their creators and will likely continue functioning long after anyone remains who remembers what they were originally designed to accomplish. The sound of these ancient gears, turning echoes through chambers that have known little but silence for centuries, their mechanical voices providing a counterpoint to the whisper of bone against bone that serves as this realm's constant background music. The path toward Gravelord Nito winds through galleries that serve as monuments to the kind of ambition that confuses quantity with quality, accumulation with achievement. The countless skulls and bones that line these passages represent not trophies of conquest, but rather the raw materials for magical research that has lost sight of any purpose beyond the simple gathering and manipulation of death itself. The pinwheel servants that guard the approaches to the deepest chambers move with the eerie grace of creatures that exist at the intersection of individual identity and collective consciousness, their forms shifting and changing according to principles that seem to follow patterns drawn from dreams rather than any coherent philosophy of existence. These entities represent perhaps the most disturbing aspect of necromantic magic, the way it reduces the sacred mystery of individual identity to mere components that can be mixed and matched according to the practitioner's convenience. The encounter with Pinwheel himself unfolds in chambers that exist at the very heart of the necromantic enterprise, where the distinction between researcher and subject has been blurred beyond all recognition. This tragic figure whose multiple masks speak to identity fractured and multiplied beyond any hope of restoration, represents the inevitable destination that awaits all who seek to master death through magical manipulation. Pinwheel's story, insofar as it can be reconstructed from the fragments of evidence scattered throughout his domain, speaks to the kind of tragedy that unfolds when love and desperation drive someone to seek solutions in territories where wisdom fears to tread. The power he stole from Gravelord Nito was intended not for conquest or personal aggrandizement, but for the resurrection of loved ones claimed by forces beyond mortal ability to resist or overcome. Yet the magic he wielded proved incapable of distinguishing between what should be preserved and what should be allowed to rest in peace, between the essential elements of identity and the countless fragments that make up individual consciousness. The result of his efforts was not the restoration of those he sought to save, but rather their transformation into components of his own fractured existence, their individual voices becoming part of a chorus that speaks with his words while carrying within it echoes of their eternal confusion. The battle with this multiplied being takes place in chambers filled with the apparatus of necromantic research, surrounded by books and instruments that document centuries of experimentation, carried out by someone who gradually lost the ability to distinguish between success and failure, between progress and the mere accumulation of increasingly desperate attempts to achieve the impossible. When Pinwheel finally falls, his death brings not the satisfaction of victory over evil, but rather a profound sense of pity for someone who began with the noblest of motivations and gradually became something monstrous through the accumulation of small compromises and moral shortcuts that seem necessary at the time. The rite of kindling that his defeat makes possible represents not just increased power for the chosen undead, but also a form of mercy for the countless souls that his experiments had trapped in states of existence that served no bleem, one's true interests. The descent to the very bottom of the catacombs, where Gravelord Nito holds court in chambers that exist at the intersection of architecture and geology, unfolds like a journey into the fundamental structures that underlie all existence. The massive caverns that house this Lord of Death stretch beyond the reach of any light that mortal hands might carry, their dimensions following principles that have more to do with cosmic significance than with any practical considerations of space or function. Nito himself, when he finally rises from his throne of bones to face the challenger who has disturbed his eternal rest, represents death not as ending, but as cosmic principle made manifest, a force of nature that operates according to laws that transcend mortal understanding, while serving purposes that extend far beyond individual consciousness or preference. His massive form towers above the chosen undead, like a living mountain composed of every skeleton that has ever surrendered its flesh to the patient work of time and decay. The Gravelord's presence fills the chamber with energies that speak to the fundamental truth that all life is temporary, all flesh is borrowed, all individual existence merely a brief interruption in the endless cycle of birth and dissolution that governs the material world. His attacks come not from malice or territorial instinct, but from the simple recognition that the living represent an anomaly in his domain, a contradiction that must be resolved through the application of the same patient forces that have claimed every other creature that has ever drawn breath. Yet there is something profoundly sad about this mighty being, something that speaks to the loneliness that comes from being the sole consciousness capable of truly understanding the cosmic forces that he embodies. Nito rules over a kingdom of the dead not because he desires power or dominion, but because death itself requires some form of organizing principle, some intelligence capable of ensuring that the endless cycles of dissolution and renewal continue to operate according to patterns that serve the greater good rather than mere chaos. The battle with the Gravelord unfolds in dimensions that extend far beyond the merely physical, each exchange representing not just tactical success or failure, but movement in a cosmic dance that has been playing out since consciousness first emerged from the primordial darkness. The skeletal servants that rise at his command to assist in combat represent not reinforcements in any conventional sense, but rather extensions of his own essential nature, manifestations of the death principle that he embodies. When Nito finally falls, his defeat represents not the destruction of death itself, but rather the temporary disruption of the organizing intelligence that has guided its operation for ages beyond counting. The Lord Soul that his dissolution yields carries within it not just power, but the accumulated weight of every ending that has ever occurred, every transition from existence to whatever lies beyond the boundaries of mortal understanding. The journey from the depths of the catacombs to the flooded ruins of New Londo represents a transition from realms governed by death to territories claimed by something even more fundamental and terrible: the seductive power of the dark. Soul itself, that fragment of cosmic force that speaks to humanity's deepest potential and most dangerous temptations. New Londo, in its current state, bears little resemblance to the great city it once was. Its streets and buildings now lying beneath waters that carry within them more than mere moisture. The flood that claimed this metropolis was not a natural disaster, but rather a desperate measure taken by those who understood that some threats to existence itself justify the sacrifice of everything that makes existence worthwhile. The ghosts that populate these submerged ruins represent not the spirits of those who died in the flooding, but rather something far more disturbing: the remnants of consciousness that lingers when the soul has been corrupted by contact with forces that exist beyond the normal boundaries of light and darkness. These ethereal beings move through the flooded chambers with the purposeless persistence of thoughts that have become disconnected from the minds that originally conceived them. The transient curses that allow the living to harm these spiritual entities carry within them fragments of the same corruption that originally necessitated New Londo's destruction, temporary transformations that provide the chosen undead with the ability to interact with beings that exist partially outside normal physical law. Yet the use of such curses comes with its own costs. Subtle changes that accumulate with exposure until the boundary between living and dead begins to blur in ways that threaten individual identity itself. The architecture of submerged New Londo speaks to ambitions that once rivaled those of Anor Londo itself. Grand designs that were meant to create a city worthy of humanity's greatest achievements and noblest aspirations. The Gothic spires that rise from the dark waters still possess a haunting beauty that speaks to the skill of their creators, while the elaborate bridges and walkways demonstrate the kind of urban planning that could only have been conceived by minds that thought in terms of centuries rather than mere decades. Yet all of this magnificence has been transformed by the tragedy that claimed the city, every beautiful detail now serving as a monument to the gap between human aspiration and human achievement, between the dreams that drive great projects and the realities that ultimately determine their fate. The dark water that fills every street and chamber serves as both grave marker and warning, a reminder of the price that must sometimes be paid when the pursuit of power extends beyond the boundaries of wisdom. The dark wraiths that guard the approaches to the Four Kings represent perhaps the most seductive form of corruption that the chosen undead will encounter, for these fallen knights embody the promise that power without restraint offers to those willing to abandon the moral limitations that govern ordinary existence. Their dark armor gleams with energies that speak to strength drawn from sources that care nothing for conventional notions of right and wrong. while their movements flow with the fluid grace of warriors who have transcended the physical limitations that bind lesser combatants. These corrupted champions move through the flooded ruins with the confidence of those who have embraced their own damnation and found in it a kind of terrible freedom, their attacks carrying within them the accumulated fury of beings who have chosen to define themselves in opposition to everything that once gave their existence meaning. They represent not evil in any simple sense, but rather the inevitable destination that awaits all who seek power for its own sake, rather than in service of purposes greater than themselves. The elevator that descends to the very bottom of the abyss operates according to principles that have more to do with spiritual descent than mere physical transportation, carrying the chosen undead not just deeper into the earth but closer to fundamental truths about the nature of existence that most minds lack the fortitude to confront directly. The mechanism itself seems to exist partially outside normal space and time, its movement following rhythms that speak to cosmic forces rather than conventional engineering. The abyss itself, when it finally opens before the descending challenger, represents not mere absence, but rather the presence of something so alien to normal consciousness that the mind can only perceive it as emptiness. This realm exists at the intersection of all possibilities, where the potential for both creation and destruction reaches levels that transcend mortal ability to comprehend or control. Here, in chambers that seem to stretch beyond the boundaries of physical reality, the four kings hold court over a kingdom that exists more in potential than in any concrete manifestation. These beings, who were once mighty rulers of the great city above, have been transformed by their contact with the dark soul into something that exists at the boundaries between individual identity and collective consciousness. The encounter with the four kings unfolds not as a conventional battle, but rather as a test of the chosen undead's ability to maintain individual identity while exposed to forces that seek to dissolve all boundaries between self, other, between individual will, and cosmic purpose. The kings themselves appear not as discrete entities, but as manifestations of a single intelligence that has been fractured and multiplied by exposure to powers that operate according to principles fundamentally alien to mortal understanding. Their attacks carry within them the seductive promise of unity without individuality, power without responsibility, existence without the burden of moral choice that defines human consciousness. Each strike represents not just physical danger, but spiritual temptation, an invitation to surrender individual identity in exchange for absorption into something greater and more powerful than any mortal soul could hope to achieve through its own efforts. The battle takes place in dimensions that extend far beyond the merely physical, where success and failure are measured not just in terms of tactical superiority, but in the challenger's ability to resist the fundamental dissolution that the abyss represents. The dark magic that the kings wield operates according to principles that bypass conventional defenses to strike directly at the core of individual identity, seeking to convince the soul itself that resistance is futile and surrender inevitable. When the four kings finally fall, their defeat represents not victory in any conventional sense, but rather successful resistance to temptations that have claimed countless souls who believed themselves strong enough to wield the power of the dark without being consumed by it. The Lord's soul fragment that their dissolution yields carries within it not just cosmic energy, but the accumulated weight of all the compromises and moral shortcuts that led these once noble rulers from the heights of human achievement to the depths of spiritual corruption. Yet even as the chosen undead claims this mighty prize, questions multiply rather than resolve about the true nature of the path they have chosen to follow. The encounter with the four kings has revealed truths about the relationship between individual will and cosmic force that complicate every assumption about heroism and destiny that has guided their journey thus far. The appearance of Darkstalker Carthy in the aftermath of this victory brings with it revelations that cast everything the chosen undead has been told in an entirely new light, perspectives that challenge the fundamental assumptions upon which their quest has been based. This ancient primordial serpent speaks with the same authority as Frampt, yet his words carry implications that directly contradict everything the other serpent has counseled. Carthy's revelations about the true nature of the first flame and the cosmic cycles that govern existence itself provide answers to questions that the chosen undead had not even known they should be asking. The Age of Fire, he explains, represents not the natural state of the world, but rather an artificial prolonging of conditions that were always meant to be temporary, a desperate attempt by the gods to maintain power that rightfully should have passed to humanity ages ago. The dark soul that humanity possesses, according to Carthy's teachings, represents not corruption or evil, but rather the next stage in cosmic evolution, the force that should naturally succeed the fading light of the first flame. The linking of the fire that Frampt advocates and Guinevere commands represents not heroic sacrifice, but rather the perpetuation of an unjust system that denies humanity its rightful inheritance. These revelations transform the chosen undead's entire understanding of their quest, revealing that the choice they face extends far beyond the simple question of personal sacrifice that they had originally understood. The decision between linking the fire and allowing the Age of Dark to begin represents nothing less than the choice between perpetuating the current cosmic order and ushering in an entirely new phase of existence whose ultimate consequences cannot be predicted or controlled. The weight of this knowledge settles upon the chosen undead, like a burden that threatens to crush the very foundations of identity and purpose that have sustained them through all their trials. They stand at the crossroads between competing visions of cosmic destiny, holding within their mortal frame power sufficient to determine not just their own fate, but the fate of all existence itself. The Lord souls that pulse within the Lord vessel carry energies that speak to forces far greater than any individual consciousness should be asked to wield. Cosmic powers that were never meant to be gathered into a single vessel yet, which now await the final choice that will determine whether the current age continues or gives way to something entirely new and unpredictable. The path forward leads not towards simple resolution, but toward complexities that multiply with each new revelation, questions that challenge every assumption about heroism and duty, and the relationship between individual will and cosmic necessity. The chosen undead must now decide not just what they are willing to sacrifice, but what kind of world their sacrifice will create or preserve, what legacy their choices will leave for generations yet unborn. The discovery of the painted world of Ariamis represents one of the most profound encounters with otherness that the chosen undead will experience in all their travels through Lordran. For this realm exists not merely as another location to be explored, but as a fundamental challenge to every assumption about the nature of reality, exile, and the relationship between sanctuary and prison. The path to this hidden world begins with seemingly innocuous curiosity about a painting that hangs in Anor Londo's cathedral, its surface depicting a winter landscape of such haunting beauty that it seems to call out to something deep within the observer's consciousness. Yet this is no mere artistic representation, but rather a window into a realm that exists parallel to the normal world, a place created to contain things that the gods and their servants deemed too dangerous or too strange to be allowed existence in the primary reality. The doll that serves as key to this painted realm carries within its simple form mysteries that speak to the relationship between representation and reality, between image and essence. This small figure, crafted with such exquisite attention to detail that it seems almost alive, embodies the power to transport consciousness across boundaries that normally prove insurmountable to mortal perception. The moment of transition into the painted world unfolds like a dream that gradually reveals itself to be more real than waking life. The familiar architecture of Anor Londo dissolving around the chosen undead, as they are drawn into a landscape that follows rules drawn from imagination rather than physics. The sensation is simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying, for it represents the complete abandonment of everything that normal experience provides as anchor and reference point. The world that receives the transported consciousness exists in a state of perpetual winter that speaks not to natural seasonal cycles, but to the kind of cold that comes from spiritual exile, the chill that settles into places that have been cut off from the warming influence of hope and community. The snow that falls constantly throughout this realm carries within it the accumulated sadness of countless souls who have been deemed unworthy of existence in the primary world. The architecture of Ariamis reflects the aesthetic preferences of minds that understood beauty as something separate from function. Builders who created their structures not to serve practical needs, but to provide environments worthy of beings whose very existence represents a form of living art. The twisted spires and impossible buttresses that characterize the painted city's skyline speak to imagination, freed from the constraints of engineering necessity or physical law. Yet for all its beauty, for all the obvious skill that went into its creation, there is something profoundly melancholy about this painted realm that becomes apparent to anyone who spends time exploring its chambers and corridors. This is a world created for exiles, a sanctuary built for things that were deemed too strange or too dangerous to be permitted existence elsewhere. Every beautiful detail serves as a reminder of separation. Every architectural marvel stands as testimony to the gap between those who belong and those who have been cast out. The inhabitants of this realm represent a catalogue of beings that failed to find acceptance in the primary world, creatures whose only crime was existing in forms or expressing natures that challenged the comfortable assumptions of those who held power over questions of belonging and exile. The crow demons that populate the painted city's upper reaches move with the grace of beings who have learned to find dignity in rejection, their dark forms cutting through the perpetual snowfall, with movements that speak to adaptation born from necessity rather than choice. These avian humanoids possess intelligence that manifests in complex social structures and cooperative behaviors, yet their alien forms and alien logic made them unwelcome in realms designed for beings that conform to more familiar patterns of existence. Their presence in this painted sanctuary speaks to the arbitrary nature of many distinctions between acceptable and unacceptable, normal and strange, worthy and unworthy of continued existence. The engorged zombies that shamble through the painted world's lower reaches represent perhaps the most tragic category of exile, beings whose only transgression was succumbing to forms of corruption or disease that made their continued presence among the healthy an uncomfortable reminder of mortality and vulnerability. Their bloated forms move with the patient persistence of those who have nowhere else to go, no other realm that will accept them in their current condition. Yet even in their degraded state, these unfortunate souls demonstrate behaviors that speak to retained fragments of their original humanity, moments of recognition or communication that suggest consciousness persists despite physical transformation. Their exile to this painted realm represents not mercy in any conventional sense, but rather the kind of solution that allows the healthy to maintain their comfort while avoiding the moral weight of direct extermination. The painting guardians that protect certain areas of this realm move with deadly grace that speaks to skills honed through centuries of practice in environments that demand perfection or death, their curved blades dancing through combat encounters with lethal beauty. These mysterious warriors serve not out of compulsion or magical binding, but from genuine dedication to protecting a realm that has provided sanctuary for those who found no welcome elsewhere. Their masks hide faces that might reveal too much about the personal histories that led them to accept roles as protectors of the exiled and forgotten, while their fluid movements suggest training in martial arts that developed in isolation from the conventional fighting styles practiced in the primary world. They represent the evolution that becomes possible when beings are freed from the constraints of conformity and allowed to develop their capabilities according to principles drawn from necessity rather than tradition. The phalanx demons that guard certain critical passages within the painted world demonstrate the kind of collective intelligence that emerges when individual consciousness merges into something larger and more complex than the sum of its parts. These creatures, which appear to be composed of countless smaller entities working in perfect coordination, represent one possible response to the isolation that exile creates: the formation of new kinds of community that transcend traditional boundaries between self and other. Their attacks flow like extensions of a single vast organism rather than the coordinated actions of multiple individuals, creating combat encounters that challenge every assumption about the relationship between identity and collective action. Yet their presence in this realm of exiles suggests that even the most alien forms of consciousness can find belonging when given environments that accept them as they are rather than demanding conformity to external standards. The great undead dragon that dominates the painted world's central courtyard represents perhaps the most magnificent and tragic inhabitant of this realm of exiles, a creature whose very existence challenges the comfortable distinctions between life and death that govern most beings' understanding of natural order. This massive entity, whose form combines the majesty of ancient dragons with the persistence of undead existence, embodies contradictions that prove too complex for the primary world to accommodate. The dragon's breath weapon, which inflicts not death but the curse of petrification, speaks to powers that operate according to principles that transcend normal categories of harm and healing. Those who fall victim to this attack find themselves transformed into stone that preserves their consciousness while denying them any ability to act upon the world around them, a fate that represents perhaps the ultimate expression of exile, continued existence, coupled with complete powerlessness. Yet there is something profoundly sad about this mighty being, something that speaks to the loneliness that comes from being the sole representative of one's kind in a realm designed for outcasts and exiles. The dragon's attacks seem motivated not by malice or territorial instinct, but by a desperate desire for interaction, for some form of contact with other consciousness, even if that contact must take the form of combat. The defeat of this tragic creature brings not triumph, but rather a profound sense of loss for what might have been, for the conversations that might have been possible if language could bridge the gap between human and draconic consciousness. The soul that the dragon's death yields carries within it not just power, but the accumulated weight of isolation and the desperate hope for understanding that motivated its final battle. The journey through the painted world's various districts reveals layer upon layer of exile communities that have found ways to create meaning and beauty despite their separation from the primary world. The residential areas show evidence of architectural innovations that could only have developed in environments freed from conventional building codes and aesthetic expectations, while the workshops and studios demonstrate the kind of creative flowering that sometimes emerges when artists are given complete freedom from commercial or social pressure. Yet everywhere there are signs of the price that such freedom exacts: evidence of the psychological toll that exile takes even on those who find ways to thrive in their separation. The empty chambers that dot the painted city speak to inhabitants who succumb to despair despite the realm's beauty, while the abandoned projects scattered throughout various districts suggest creative endeavors that were begun with enthusiasm, but eventually abandoned as their creators lost faith in the possibility of meaningful achievement. The optional encounters with various inhabitants of this painted realm provide glimpses into individual stories of exile and adaptation that complicate every simple understanding of justice and punishment. The painted world represents not a solution to the problem of otherness, but rather a temporary postponement of the fundamental questions that such otherness raises about the nature of community and belonging. Crossbreed Priscilla, when she finally appears in the painted world's most sacred chamber, embodies everything that makes this realm both beautiful and tragic, representing the kind of being that challenges fundamental categories of existence in ways that prove too complex for simpler minds to process. Her form combines draconic and divine elements in proportions that speak to heritage, spanning multiple categories of existence, while her manner suggests intelligence and compassion that transcend the boundaries of any single species or realm. Priscilla's words carry the authority of someone who has found peace in exile, while understanding the price that such peace demands from those who accept it. She speaks of the painted world as a sanctuary for those who seek no conflict with the primary realm, a place where differences can be preserved without threatening the comfortable assumptions of those who remain outside. Her offer of peaceful coexistence represents perhaps the most generous response to unwelcome visitors that anyone in the chosen undead's position could hope to receive. Yet her very existence poses questions that her peaceful nature cannot resolve, for she represents possibilities that the primary world's power structures could not accommodate without fundamental reorganization. Her mixed heritage speaks to connections between realms and species that threaten established hierarchies, while her obvious wisdom and compassion make clear that her exile was motivated by fear rather than justice. The choice of whether to accept Priscilla's offer of peaceful coexistence or to challenge this gentle guardian represents one of the most morally complex decisions that the chosen undead will face in all their travels. She poses no threat to anyone who does not threaten her first, yet she possesses a soul that could contribute to the great work that awaits completion. Her death would represent not heroism in any conventional sense, but rather the sacrifice of innocence to necessity, the kind of compromise that stains even the noblest purposes. The battle with Priscilla, should the chosen undead choose to initiate it, unfolds like a tragedy performed in chambers that seem to exist outside normal space and time. Her attacks flow with liquid grace that speaks to powers drawn from sources that care nothing for conventional distinctions between offense and defense, while her invisibility represents not mere tactical advantage but fundamental alienness that allows her to exist partially outside the normal flow of causation. When Priscilla finally falls, her death brings not satisfaction, but rather a profound sense of loss for what the world has become, when gentle beings cannot be allowed to exist simply because their nature challenges comfortable assumptions about the way things should be. The soul that her defeat yields carries within it not just power, but the accumulated weight of all the possibilities for peace and understanding that her death forecloses forever. The escape from the painted world returns the chosen undead to the familiar chambers of Anor Londo, yet this transition feels less like homecoming than like awakening from a dream that revealed truths too complex for waking consciousness to fully process. The painted realm continues to exist behind its artistic barrier, housing its community of exiles and outcasts, serving as a constant reminder that the primary world's apparent order depends upon the exclusion of everything that might challenge its fundamental assumptions. The journey back to territories that the chosen undead has previously explored reveals changes that speak to the fundamental instability that underlies all apparent permanence in this dying world. Firelink Shrine. When visited after the ringing of the bells and the gathering of Lord Souls, shows signs of the kind of decay that comes not from mere passage of time, but from the gradual failure of the cosmic mechanisms that maintain reality's basic structure. The bonfire that once burned with steady reliability now flickers with irregular rhythms that suggest fuel running low or combustion processes that no longer operate according to consistent principles. The light that it provides seems dimmer than before, while the warmth that it offers carries within it the chill of something that approaches its natural conclusion. The crestfallen warrior, when encountered again after so much time and so many experiences, presents a figure transformed by the accumulation of disappointment and the gradual erosion of whatever hope once sustained his vigil beside the eternal flame. His words carry new weights of bitterness. His observations penetrate deeper into the fundamental futility that characterizes most heroic endeavors in this dying world. Yet there is also something almost peaceful about his current state, as if the complete abandonment of hope has freed him from the burden of expectation and allowed him to find a kind of comfort in despair itself. His hollow laughter echoes through chambers that seem smaller and more confining than they did when the chosen undead first arrived at this supposed sanctuary. The revelation of Ash Lake, that vast underground ocean that exists beneath the roots of the great trees, provides perhaps the most profound glimpse into the true nature of reality that any mortal consciousness can hope to experience and survive. This realm exists at the foundation of everything, the place where the fundamental structures that support all higher levels of existence reveal themselves in forms that transcend normal architectural categories. The ancient dragons that move through this primordial landscape represent not inhabitants in any conventional sense, but rather embodiments of principles so fundamental to existence that their presence predates the distinction between living and non-living, between individual and environment. Their massive forms drift through spaces that seem to expand and contract according to their movement, rather than conforming to fixed dimensions. The hydra that lurks in the lake's crystalline waters embodies the kind of primal force that existed before the gods imposed their particular vision of order upon the chaotic potentials that characterize reality's deepest levels. Its multiple heads strike with coordination that speaks to intelligence distributed across forms that challenge every assumption about the relationship between consciousness and individual identity. The battle with this ancient creature takes place in dimensions that extend far beyond the merely physical, where success and failure are measured not just in terms of tactical superiority, but in the challenger's ability to maintain coherent identity while exposed to forces that predate the development of individual consciousness as a patent, stable category of existence. The ancient dragon that can be encountered in Ash Lake's deepest reaches represents perhaps the most profound mystery that the chosen undead will face in all their travels. A being whose very existence calls into question everything they have been told about the nature of dragons and their relationship to the current cosmic order. This creature shows no hostility toward visitors, no territorial instincts that would motivate it to defend its realm against intruders. Instead, it offers membership in an ancient covenant that speaks to forms of loyalty and commitment that transcend the political and personal categories that govern most relationships between conscious beings. The path of the dragon represents not mere alliance but fundamental transformation, the gradual abandonment of human identity in favor of something older and more basic than individual consciousness. The optional encounters with characters whose stories have been developing throughout the chosen undead's journey provide opportunities to witness the completion of tragic arcs that began with hope and determination, but gradually evolved into something far more complex and heartbreaking. These meetings serve as reminders that heroism and tragedy are often distinguished, not by outcome but by the perspective from which events are observed. Siegmeyer of Katarina, when encountered in the various locations where his quest intersects with the chosen undead's path, embodies the kind of nobility that remains intact despite repeated exposure to circumstances that would break lesser spirits. His cheerful demeanor and unwavering courtesy mask depths of sadness that speak to someone who understands the futility of his endeavors, while continuing to pursue them out of loyalty to principles that transcend practical consideration. The knight's eventual fate, regardless of how much assistance he receives from well-meaning allies, demonstrates the kind of cosmic inevitability that governs the stories of all who venture into territories where individual will confront forces that operate according to principles drawn from necessity rather than preference. His final encounter provides a meditation on the relationship between dignity and defeat, between heroic intention and tragic outcome. The hollowing that claims so many characters who begin their stories with purpose and determination serves as a constant reminder of the fate that awaits all undead who lose sight of whatever goals once gave their existence meaning. Yet there is something almost merciful about this gradual dissolution of consciousness, this slow fade into a state where disappointment and suffering no longer retain the power to inflict pain. The evidence of these completed character arcs transforms familiar locations into monuments to the gap between aspiration and achievement, between the dreams that motivate great endeavors and the realities that ultimately determine their outcomes. Each hollow warrior encountered in territories that were once populated by beings with names and stories represents not just an obstacle to be overcome, but a cautionary tale about the ultimate destination that awaits all who venture to, far beyond the comfortable boundaries of normal existence. The return to these transformed territories provides the chosen undead with opportunities for reflection that go far beyond mere nostalgia for simpler times. The changes that have occurred during their absence speak to the fundamental instability that characterizes all apparent permanence in this dying world, while the persistence of certain elements demonstrates the selective nature of decay and the arbitrary relationship between value and survival. These revelations about the hidden corners and optional paths of Lordran serve to complicate rather than simplify the moral landscape that the chosen undead must navigate in approaching their final choice. Each new discovery adds weight to questions about the nature of heroism and the relationship between individual action and cosmic consequence, while each completed tragic arc provides another perspective on the gap between intention and result that characterizes so much of existence in this fading world. The accumulated knowledge from these explorations settles upon the chosen undead like a burden that threatens to crush the very foundations of purpose and determination that have sustained them through all their trials. They stand at the threshold of their final challenge, carrying not just the power of gathered Lord souls, but the weight of countless stories that complicate every simple understanding of right and wrong, success and failure, heroism and tragedy. The approach to the kiln of the first flame unfolds not as a journey through familiar territories, but as a pilgrimage into realms that exist at the very foundation of existence itself, where the fundamental forces that shape the world from primordial chaos still burn with diminished but unextinguished power. The path that leads to this most sacred and terrible of destinations winds through landscapes that seem to exist outside the normal flow of time and space, where the very air carries within it the accumulated weight of ages beyond counting. The transition from the mortal realm to these cosmic territories begins subtly, with changes so gradual that they might be dismissed as tricks of perception or effects of the emotional weight that accompanies any journey toward ultimate destiny. Yet careful observation reveals that the very nature of reality operates according to different principles here, where the boundaries between matter and energy, between physical law and divine will, grow increasingly thin and permeable. The architecture that lines this sacred path speaks to builders whose understanding of construction transcended mere engineering to become a form of prayer made manifest in stone and metal. These structures, which seem to have grown from the landscape rather than been imposed upon it, demonstrate the kind of harmony between intention and environment that can only be achieved when creators work in perfect alignment with cosmic forces rather than in opposition to them. The light that illuminates these approaches to the first flame carries within it qualities that exist nowhere else in all of Lordran, a radiance that seems to emanate from the very stones themselves, while simultaneously streaming down from sources that exist beyond the visible sky. This illumination reveals every detail with crystalline clarity, while somehow managing to preserve the essential mystery that surrounds anything truly sacred, creating an atmosphere that encourages both reverence and wonder. Yet there is something troubling about this light, something that speaks to fires that have burned too long and consumed too much of their original fuel. The radiance carries within it the kind of exhaustion that comes not from temporary exertion but from efforts sustained beyond all reasonable limits, the weariness that settles into flames that have been forced to burn when they should have been allowed to rest. The black knights that patrol these sacred precincts move with the patient persistence of guardians who have maintained their vigil long past the point where their vigilance serves any practical purpose. These charred warriors, whose armor has been blackened by exposure to flames that burn at temperatures exceeding anything that should exist in the natural world, represent dedication elevated to the level of cosmic principle. Their weapons, forged from materials that exist at the intersection of matter and energy, gleam with inner fires that speak to power drawn from the same sources that fuel the first flame itself. Each blade carries within its metal the accumulated heat of centuries spent in proximity to forces that operate according to principles that transcend normal understanding of combustion and energy. The Black Knight's attacks flow with mechanical precision that speaks not to hollow mindlessness, but to consciousness reduced to its most essential components. Awareness stripped of everything except the single purpose that has defined their existence since the day they first took up their eternal watch. They fight not from malice or territorial instinct, but from recognition that some things are too sacred to be approached by the unworthy, too dangerous to be accessed by those who lack the strength to survive contact with ultimate power. Yet there is something profoundly sad about these devoted guardians, something that speaks to the loneliness that comes from serving purposes that no longer connect to any living community or comprehensible goal. They continue their watch not because anyone remembers to appreciate their sacrifice, but because the habit of duty has become so deeply ingrained that abandonment would represent a form of spiritual death more complete than any physical dissolution. The battles with these tragic figures unfold like elegies performed in armor, each clash of weapons creating harmonics that seem to echo through dimensions beyond the merely physical. Their superior skill and devastating power make each encounter a meditation on the relationship between dedication and futility, between purpose and obsolescence, between the kind of heroism that endures long after anyone remains who remembers why such heroism was originally necessary. When these guardians fall, their deaths bring not triumph, but rather a profound sense of loss for what the world has become, when such dedication can find no better expression than endless violence in service of goals that have lost all connection to living purpose. The souls that their defeats yield carry within them not just power, but the accumulated weight of centuries spent in loyal service to masters who have forgotten the meaning of the very things they once sought to protect. The deeper one ventures into these sacred territories, the more apparent it becomes that the kiln of the first flame exists, not merely as a physical location, but as the intersection point where all the fundamental forces that govern existence converge into patterns too complex for mortal minds to fully comprehend. The very ground seems to pulse with energies that speak to processes that have been continuing since the moment when light first emerged from the primordial darkness. The architecture of the kiln itself, when it finally rises into view, represents the ultimate expression of builders who understood construction, not as the imposition of order upon chaos, but as the revelation of patterns that already existed within the cosmic structure of reality itself. The great arches and soaring buttresses seem to grow from mathematical principles rather than engineering necessity, while the elaborate decorative elements speak to aesthetic sensibilities that found beauty in the fundamental equations that govern all existence. Yet, for all its magnificent proportions and obvious sacred significance, there is something deeply troubling about this great structure that becomes apparent to anyone who observes it with sufficient attention and wisdom. The kiln shows signs of the same decay that has claimed so much of Lordran, evidence of forces that no amount of divine power seems capable of holding back indefinitely. The cracks that run through the great supporting pillars speak to stresses that exceed the capacity of even the most perfectly designed structures to withstand, while the areas where stonework has begun to crumble suggest that the fundamental forces that once held everything together in perfect harmony have begun to operate according to different and less stable principles. The interior chambers of the kiln stretch beyond normal architectural boundaries, their dimensions following rules that have more to do with symbolic meaning than with any practical considerations of space or function. The great halls seem to expand and contract according to the observer's emotional state, growing vast when filled with awe or wonder, while shrinking to intimate proportions when approached with humility or reverence. The murals and decorative elements that cover every surface tell the story of the first flame's discovery and the age of gods that followed. Yet, these artistic representations carry within them layers of meaning that transform simple historical narrative into complex meditation on the relationship between power and responsibility, between individual will and cosmic necessity. The images depict the original lords in their moments of greatest triumph, showing them wielding the power they claimed from the first flame to reshape the world according to their vision of what existence should become. Yet careful observation reveals subtle details that complicate these apparently celebratory scenes, hints of cost and consequence that the surface narrative does not acknowledge. The great bonfire that burns at the kiln's heart represents not merely a larger version of the familiar healing flames that dot the landscape of Lordran, but something qualitatively different, a fire that exists at the intersection of all possible fires, while somehow remaining distinct from any of them. Its flames dance with colors that exist nowhere else in the spectrum, hues that speak directly to the soul without requiring interpretation by the eye or brain. Yet this ultimate fire shows signs of the same exhaustion that characterizes its lesser manifestations throughout the kingdom, flickering with irregular rhythms that suggest fuel running low, or combustion processes that no longer operate according to stable principles. The light it provides seems dimmer than ancient texts suggest it once was, while the warmth it offers carries within it the chill of something that approaches its natural conclusion. The approach to this sacred flame requires passage through chambers that seem designed to test not just combat prowess or tactical intelligence, but the very foundations of character and purpose that define individual identity. The trials become increasingly subtle as one draws closer to the ultimate destination, shifting from obvious physical challenges to psychological, and spiritual tests that operate on levels that most consciousness never encounters. The silence that fills these innermost chambers carries weight that presses upon the soul like accumulated centuries of expectation and disappointment, hope and despair, triumph and tragedy, all compressed into an atmosphere that threatens to crush anyone who lacks the spiritual strength necessary to bear witness to ultimate truth. This is not mere absence of sound, but the kind of quiet that comes when all possible words have been exhausted and only the most fundamental realities remain. It is in this atmosphere of cosmic expectation and spiritual exhaustion that the chosen undead finally encounters Gwyn, Lord of Cinder, the being whose sacrifice created the Age of Gods and whose continued existence represents both the foundation and the limitation of everything that current reality has become. Yet this meeting unfolds not as the triumphant confrontation between hero and villain that lesser tales might suggest, but as something far more complex and heartbreaking. The figure that rises to face the challenger carries within his diminished form echoes of the majesty and power that once made him worthy to be called the greatest of all lords. Yet those echoes serve only to emphasize the profound transformation that has claimed him during his ages of sacrifice. This is not the proud god-king of ancient legend, but rather the burned-out remnant of someone who gave too much of himself in service of purposes that ultimately proved impossible to achieve. Gwyn's appearance speaks to the price that linking the fire has demanded from him, the gradual consumption of everything that once made him recognizably himself in service of maintaining cosmic forces that were never meant to be sustained through individual sacrifice. His form flickers between solid matter and pure energy, while his movements carry the mechanical precision of someone who has forgotten every motivation, save the single imperative that has defined his existence for ages beyond counting. The Lord of Cinder's attacks flow with muscle memory that recalls techniques learned in an age when combat was art rather than mere survival, when battles were fought for glory and honor rather than from the desperate need to prevent total cosmic collapse. Yet these same attacks carry within them the fury of someone who has been forced to maintain an impossible vigil while watching everything he once valued slowly crumble despite all his efforts to preserve it. The battle that unfolds in the chamber of the first flame represents far more than a simple test of martial superiority, for it embodies the collision between two different visions of what heroism means and what sacrifices are justified in service of preserving light in a world that seems determined to embrace darkness. Each exchange of blows carries within it the weight of competing philosophies about duty and individual will, about the relationship between personal desire and cosmic necessity. Gwyn fights not from malice or territorial instinct, but from recognition that his sacrifice has meaning only as long as someone continues to maintain the flame that his own immolation originally kindled. His attacks represent not aggression, but rather the desperate determination of someone who understands that his entire existence has been reduced to a single function, and that abandoning that function would render all his previous suffering meaningless. Yet there is something profoundly tragic about this ultimate guardian, something that speaks to the loneliness that comes from serving purposes that no one else truly understands while bearing burdens that no individual consciousness should be asked to carry indefinitely. His continued existence represents not triumph over the forces of entropy, but rather the kind of stubborn persistence that sometimes characterizes the final stages of causes that have already been lost. The Lord of Cinder's techniques demonstrate mastery of combat arts that developed in ages when warfare was conducted according to principles that modern fighters can barely comprehend, his blade work flowing with combinations that speak to training that began before recorded history and continued through eras that witnessed the rise and fall of entire civilizations. Yet this same expertise carries within it the mechanical quality that comes when skill becomes separated from joy. when competence persists long after passion has been consumed. His lightning attacks call down power from sources that exist beyond the normal boundaries between earth and sky, energies that speak to his original nature as a being whose authority extended across realms that mortal minds struggle to conceptualize. These devastating strikes represent not mere magical technique, but rather the expression of divine will made manifest in forms that can interact with physical reality. Yet even these mighty displays of power show signs of the same exhaustion that characterizes everything else about this tragic figure, energies that flicker and waver, rather than blazing with the steady intensity that ancient texts attribute to the Lord of Sunlight in his original glory. The lightning strikes with force sufficient to shatter stone and melt metal, yet they carry within them an undertone of weariness that speaks to reserves running dangerously low. The music that accompanies this ultimate confrontation exists not as mere background atmosphere, but as an integral part of the experience itself. Harmonics that seem to emerge from the conflict between opposing forces rather than from any conventional instrumental source. The melodies that weave through the chamber speak to the tragic inevitability that governs this encounter, themes that acknowledge both the nobility and the futility that characterize all attempts to impose individual will upon cosmic forces. These musical elements carry within them echoes of the Age of Gods in its original glory, fragments of songs that once celebrated the triumph of light over darkness and order over chaos. Yet these same melodies have been transformed by centuries of repetition into something that speaks more to endurance than to victory, persistence rather than triumph, duty divorced from hope or joy. As the battle reaches its climax, as the accumulated fury and desperation of ages spent in impossible service finally find expression in combat that transcends mere physical contest, both participants seem to understand that they are enacting roles in a cosmic drama whose script was written long before either of them existed as individual consciousness, capable of choice or preference. When Gwyn finally falls, his defeat represents not the victory of good over evil, but rather the completion of a cycle that has been building toward this moment since the first flame was kindled and the Age of Gods began. His death brings neither triumph nor tragedy, but rather the kind of complex resolution that acknowledges both the necessity and the cost of everything that has led to this ultimate confrontation. The Lord's soul that his dissolution yields carries within it not just the power necessary to complete the great work, but also the accumulated weight of all the choices and sacrifices that transformed a proud god-king into a burned-out remnant, whose continued existence served no purpose, beyond maintaining forces that were always meant to be temporary. The silence that follows this ultimate battle carries within it the weight of ended ages and approaching choices, cosmic transitions that will determine not just the fate of individual consciousness, but the very nature of reality itself. The first flame flickers before the chosen undead with irregular rhythms that speak to combustion processes that have reached the very limits of their capacity for self-maintenance. In this moment of ultimate revelation and cosmic possibility, surrounded by the apparatus of divine power and the remnants of sacrifices that span geological ages, the chosen undead stands at the threshold of choices that will echo through whatever ages follow their decision. The weight of gathered Lord souls presses upon them like accumulated destiny, while the dying flame before them represents both ending and beginning, conclusion and commencement, the final moment of one age, and the potential birth of whatever comes next. The chamber of the first flame exists in this moment outside the normal flow of time, suspended between what has been and what might become, waiting for the decision that will determine whether the current cosmic order continues through another cycle of sacrifice and diminishment, or gives way to something entirely new and unpredictable. Everything that has led to this moment, every battle fought, every ally lost, Every truth discovered converges into this single choice that carries within it the power to reshape existence itself. The moment of ultimate choice arrives not with fanfare or cosmic announcement, but with the quiet inevitability that characterizes all truly significant decisions. Those pivotal instants when individual will must confront forces so vast and complex that the very act of choosing seems to exceed the capacity of mortal consciousness to fully comprehend. The chosen undead stands before the dying first flame with the weight of gathered Lord souls pressing upon their spirit like accumulated destiny, while the flickering light before them represents possibilities that stretch beyond the boundaries of imagination or prediction. The chamber exists in this suspended moment, outside the normal flow of temporal progression, where past and future converge into an eternal present that contains within it all possible outcomes and their infinite ramifications. The very air seems to hold its breath in anticipation of the decision that will determine not merely individual fate, but the fundamental nature of existence itself for whatever ages follow this cosmic turning point. The first flame gutters before them with irregular rhythms that speak to combustion processes pushed beyond their natural limits, energies that have sustained themselves through cycles of sacrifice and renewal that were never meant to continue indefinitely. Each flicker of the dying light carries within it echoes of all the ages it has illuminated, all the civilizations it has nurtured, all the consciousness it has made possible through its patient burning in the depths of reality's foundation. Yet this same flame also bears witness to the price that such illumination has demanded. The countless sacrifices that have fed its hunger across spans of time that dwarf individual comprehension. The Lord's souls that burn within the chosen undead's mortal frame represent not just power, but the accumulated weight of every choice that led to this moment. Every compromise that seemed necessary at the time, every noble intention that gradually transformed into something far more complex and morally ambiguous. The choice that presents itself transcends simple categories of right and wrong, good and evil, heroism and villainy, to become something that exists in territories where such distinctions lose their meaning entirely. This is not a decision between clearly defined alternatives, but rather a leap into possibilities that can only be understood through their consequences. Paths that reveal their true nature only to those brave enough or foolish enough to walk them to their ultimate destinations. The linking of the fire, as described by FromSoftware and demanded by the cosmic order that Gwyn's sacrifice established, represents continuation of patterns that have governed existence for ages beyond counting. This path promises stability through repetition, order through sacrifice, the preservation of familiar forms of consciousness and reality, at the cost of perpetual cycles of heroism and immolation that transform individual will into fuel for cosmic mechanisms. To choose this path means to accept the role that destiny has prepared, to become the latest in a line of chosen undead who have surrendered their individual existence to maintain forces that operate according to principles drawn from necessity rather than preference. The chosen undead would join their essence to the flame itself, their consciousness becoming part of the great burning that keeps darkness at bay, while slowly consuming everything that makes them recognizably themselves. This sacrifice would preserve the current age for another cycle, maintaining the familiar hierarchies and relationships that have defined existence since the gods first claimed power from the original flame. The world that continues would be recognizable to those who understand its current form, populated by the same species following the same patterns of existence that have characterized the Age of Fire since its beginning. Yet this preservation comes at costs that extend far beyond the obvious sacrifice of individual identity and continued existence. The linking represents not genuine renewal, but rather the desperate postponement of changes that natural progression demands, the artificial maintenance of conditions that were always meant to be temporary. Each cycle grows shorter and demands greater sacrifice, while the flame itself grows weaker despite the increasingly potent fuel that heroes provide through their immolation. The lords who originally benefited from the flame's light have either died or been reduced to hollow shadows of their former selves, their immortality proving to be merely extended decline rather than genuine triumph over mortality. The gods who once justified the cosmic order through their wisdom and benevolence have become desperate tyrants clinging to power they no longer deserve and can no longer wield effectively. The kingdoms and civilizations that the flame's light supposedly protects exist in states of decay and corruption that make their continued existence questionable achievements at best. The very concept of heroism has been reduced to a cosmic utility function, a mechanism for generating the sacrificial fuel that keeps unwanted change at bay rather than a force for genuine improvement or progress. The alternative path, as revealed by Darkstalker Kathy and hinted at through encounters with the Abyss and its inhabitants, represents the embrace of change and uncertainty rather than the preservation of familiar forms through artificial means. The Age of Dark that would follow the flame's extinguishment promises not mere destruction but fundamental transformation, the emergence of new forms of existence that operate according to principles as yet unknown and unknowable. This path requires the courage to abandon everything familiar and comfortable in favor of possibilities that can only be explored through experience rather than understood through analysis or preparation. The dark that would claim the world represents not evil in any simple sense, but rather the unknown potential that exists beyond the boundaries of current understanding. The vast territories of possibility that lie hidden behind the comfortable assumptions of the Age of Fire. The humans who would inherit this dark age possess within their souls fragments of the original dark soul that Gwyn sought to suppress and contain through the establishment of his cosmic order. These fragments represent not corruption or diminishment, but rather connection to forces that predate the gods themselves, powers that were pushed into hiding but never truly destroyed or defeated. The Age of Dark would allow these suppressed potentials to finally emerge and develop according to their own internal logic, rather than being forced to conform to patterns established by beings whose understanding of existence was necessarily limited by their own nature and preferences. Humanity itself might evolve into forms that transcend current limitations, developing capabilities and perspectives that make present consciousness seem as primitive as the hollow warriors that shamble through Lordran's ruins. Yet this transformation comes with its own profound uncertainties and potential costs that make the choice far more complex than simple preference for change over stability. The dark represents not just liberation from current limitations, but also the abandonment of everything that has given existence, meaning, and structure throughout recorded history. The consciousness that emerges from such fundamental transformation might retain no connection to the values and relationships that currently define human experience. The gods and their established order, despite their obvious flaws and increasing desperation, represent accumulated wisdom and achieved understanding that took ages to develop and could never be recovered once lost. The art and architecture, the literature and philosophy, the complex relationships between different forms of consciousness that characterize the current age, all of these achievements would become irrelevant in an age that operates according to entirely different principles. The very concept of individual identity might prove incompatible with the forms of collective consciousness that the dark soul seems to favor, based on encounters with entities like the Four Kings and the Abyss Watchers, whose absorption into dark forces led to the dissolution of everything that once made them recognizably individual. The Age of Dark might represent not liberation, but rather a different and potentially more complete form of extinction than any that the current age threatens. The chosen undead faces these competing visions of cosmic destiny with full awareness that their decision will echo through whatever ages follow, yet also with the humbling recognition that the true consequences of either choice lie beyond the capacity of any individual consciousness to predict or control. They stand at the intersection of cosmic forces whose operation transcends mortal understanding, holding power sufficient to reshape reality itself, while lacking the omniscience necessary to foresee all the ramifications of its use. The weight of this responsibility threatens to paralyze decision-making entirely, for how can any individual consciousness accept accountability for choices whose consequences will affect countless beings not yet born and forms of existence not yet imagined? The moral frameworks that might guide such decisions prove inadequate when applied to situations that transcend the boundaries within which such frameworks were originally developed. Yet, paralysis itself represents a choice, for the flame will not wait indefinitely for decision, while cosmic forces continue their operation according to schedules that care nothing for individual comfort or certainty. The current age continues its decline regardless of whether anyone chooses to arrest that decline through sacrifice, while the potential for transformation into something entirely new grows stronger with each moment that passes without intervention. The gathered Lord souls pulse within the chosen undead's mortal frame with energies that speak to their eagerness for release, whether through absorption into the dying flame or through dissolution into the dark that waits beyond the boundaries of illuminated existence. These fragments of cosmic power were never meant to be contained within individual consciousness indefinitely, and their continued confinement creates tensions that threaten to tear apart the very fabric of identity that holds their bearer together. Standing before the first flame in this moment of ultimate decision, surrounded by the accumulated apparatus of divine power and the remnants of ages of sacrifice, the chosen undead must choose not just between competing visions of cosmic destiny, but between fundamentally different concepts of what it means to exist at all. The linking of the fire represents the triumph of duty over individual will, sacrifice elevated to the level of cosmic principle, the subordination of personal desire to supposedly greater purposes that operate beyond the boundaries of mortal understanding. The embrace of darkness represents the assertion of individual agency against cosmic mechanisms, the refusal to accept predetermined roles in favor of uncertain possibilities that might lead anywhere or nowhere, the willingness to risk everything familiar in pursuit of transformations that could prove either transcendent or catastrophic. The decision, when it finally comes, to emerge is not from rational calculation or moral reasoning, but from something deeper and more fundamental. The accumulated weight of every choice made and every lesson learned throughout the long journey that led to this cosmic crossroads. The chosen undead's entire existence has been shaped by encounters with beings who made their own choices about the relationship between individual will and cosmic necessity, their own decisions about the price they were willing to pay for power, and the purposes they were willing to serve. If they choose to link the fire, stepping forward into the flames that have claimed so many heroes before them, their consciousness dissolves into energies that will sustain the current age for another cycle, while gradually consuming everything that once made them recognizably themselves. The sacrifice transforms them from individual being into cosmic principle, their personal story becoming part of the great burning that keeps familiar forms of existence intact against the pressure of natural change. The world that continues as a result of this choice maintains its current forms and relationships, its established hierarchies and familiar patterns of existence. The gods retain their positions despite their obvious inadequacy. The kingdoms continue their slow decay despite their fundamental corruption, and consciousness itself remains trapped within cycles that grow increasingly destructive with each repetition. Yet this same choice preserves everything valuable that the current age has achieved: the art and architecture, the accumulated wisdom, and hard-won understanding. The complex relationships between different forms of consciousness that have developed over centuries of shared existence. The sacrifice ensures that these achievements will not be lost to the uncertain transformations that darkness might bring, even if it also ensures that they will never transcend their current limitations. If they choose instead to turn away from the dying flame and embrace the age of dark that waits beyond the boundaries of illuminated existence, the chosen undead becomes the herald of transformation, so fundamental that its ultimate consequences lie beyond all prediction or control. The familiar world dies not through violence or catastrophe, but through metamorphosis into forms that operate according to principles as yet unknown and unknowable. This choice represents the ultimate assertion of individual will against cosmic mechanisms, the refusal to accept predetermined roles in favor of possibilities that can only be explored through direct experience. The dark that claims existence might prove liberating or devastating, transcendent or merely different, but it will certainly be authentic to whatever potentials lie hidden within the foundation of reality itself. The age that follows such transformation might see consciousness evolve into forms that transcend current limitations, while retaining connection to everything valuable in human experience, or it might witness the emergence of entities so alien that no meaningful comparison with present existence becomes possible. The only certainty is change itself. Movement away from patterns that have grown stagnant and oppressive toward possibilities that remain entirely open. In the end, the choice reveals itself to be not about cosmic destiny or moral obligation, but about the fundamental question of what it means to exist as conscious being in a universe that seems to demand either conformity to predetermined patterns or courage to embrace unknown possibilities. The chosen undead's decision echoes through whatever ages follow, carrying within it the weight of every individual consciousness that has ever faced the choice between safety and authenticity, between preservation and transformation, between the familiar suffering of the known and the uncertain possibilities of the genuinely new. The flame gutters before them with its dying light, while the darkness beyond presses close with its promise of change. The moment of choice has arrived, and whatever follows will be shaped by the courage to choose rather than the wisdom to choose correctly, for wisdom itself proves inadequate when applied to decisions that transcend the boundaries of all previous understanding. The aftermath of choice unfolds not with immediate cosmic transformation, but with the kind of subtle shifts that characterize all truly fundamental changes, alterations in the very fabric of existence, that reveal their full significance only across spans of time that dwarf individual perception and understanding. The decision made in the chamber of the first flame echoes outward through dimensions both physical and metaphysical, carrying with it consequences that will reshape not merely the immediate environment, but the underlying principles that govern all subsequent existence. If the chosen undead chose to link the fire, their sacrifice extends the current age through another cycle of familiar patterns and established relationships. Yet, this continuation comes wrapped in complexities that make it impossible to characterize as simple victory or preservation. The flame that burns with renewed intensity carries within its light the accumulated weight of every soul that has fed its hunger. Every individual consciousness that has been transformed from person into principle in service of maintaining cosmic order against the pressure of natural change. The world that continues as a result of this ultimate sacrifice maintains its recognizable forms while slowly revealing the cumulative damage that cycles of artificial preservation have inflicted upon the fundamental structures of reality itself. The kingdoms and settlements that dot the landscape of Lordran show signs of restoration and renewed vitality, Yet careful observation reveals that this improvement operates according to patterns that grow increasingly mechanical and predictable with each repetition. The inhabitants who benefit from the flame's renewed light find their lives extended and their immediate suffering alleviated. Yet they also discover that the cosmic mechanisms that govern their existence have become more rigid and deterministic than ever before. The very concept of individual choice begins to fade as the linked flame imposes patterns of behavior and thought that serve its perpetuation rather than authentic human flourishing. The gods who advocated for this solution continue their reign over territories that show increasing signs of stagnation. Despite the surface appearance of stability and order, their immortality, purchased through the sacrifice of countless chosen undead, transforms them into beings whose connection to the realities of mortal existence grows more tenuous with each passing age. They become administrators of systems they no longer understand, guardians of purposes they can no longer remember, rulers whose authority rests entirely upon tradition rather than wisdom or competence. The serpents who guided the chosen undead toward this destination reveal themselves to be merely the most visible agents of cosmic forces that care nothing for individual consciousness or authentic choice. Their satisfaction with the outcome speaks not to moral vindication, but to the successful operation of mechanisms designed to extract maximum utility from heroic impulses, while ensuring that those impulses never threaten the fundamental structures of established power. The new chosen undead, who will inevitably arise in future cycles, find themselves following paths that grow increasingly constrained and predictable, their journeys shaped by cosmic forces that have learned to channel heroic potential more efficiently, while allowing less room for the kind of authentic choice that might threaten systemic stability. Each cycle produces heroes who believe themselves free while serving purposes that were predetermined long before their awakening in whatever asylum contains them. Yet even within these constraints, pockets of genuine authenticity persist in forms that the cosmic mechanisms cannot entirely predict or control. Individual consciousness possesses depths and complexities that resist complete systematization, creating spaces where real choice remains possible, despite the increasing pressure toward conformity and predetermined outcomes. If instead the chosen undead chose to embrace the Age of Dark, turning away from the dying flame to allow natural transformation to proceed without artificial intervention, the changes that follow unfold according to principles that transcend all previous understanding of how cosmic transitions operate. The darkness that claims existence proves to be not mere absence, but rather a form of presence so alien to current consciousness that its initial manifestations challenge every assumption about the nature of reality itself. The familiar landscape of Lordran undergoes transformations that speak to the emergence of organizing principles drawn from sources that predate the Age of Fire and operate according to logic that transcends the categories of thought. Developed during that age, the very geography shifts and changes as new forms of matter and energy express themselves through patterns that follow mathematical relationships unknown to current science or philosophy. The beings who inhabit this transformed world discover that consciousness itself has become more fluid and expansive, no longer constrained by the rigid boundaries of individual identity that characterized existence under the flame's influence. The dark soul fragments that were suppressed and contained during the Age of Fire finally find expression in forms that reveal their true nature as connective rather than divisive forces, energies that link rather than separate different manifestations of awareness. Yet this transformation comes with its own profound challenges and uncertainties that make it impossible to characterize as simple improvement or liberation. The forms of consciousness that emerge from contact with these dark energies often prove incompatible with the values and relationships that defined human existence during the previous age. Love, friendship, artistic creation, and moral reasoning all undergo changes so fundamental that their continued existence in recognizable forms becomes questionable. The collective intelligence that gradually replaces individual consciousness might represent the next stage in evolutionary development, or it might constitute a form of extinction more complete than any that the Age of Fire threatened. The entities that emerge from this transformation retain memories and capabilities drawn from their human origins, yet they experience these retained elements through perspectives so different that continuity of identity becomes meaningless rather than comforting. The architecture and artifacts that survive from the previous age become monuments to forms of consciousness that no longer exist, creating a world filled with evidence of individual creativity and achievement that the current inhabitants can observe but no longer truly understand. The great cathedrals and castles stand as testimony to aspirations and values that have become as foreign as the motivations of insects or the preferences of stones. The cosmic forces that govern this new age operate according to principles that make moral judgment irrelevant rather than difficult, creating situations where traditional concepts of right and wrong lose all meaning, not because they have been transcended, but because they have become inapplicable to forms of existence that no longer recognize the boundaries upon which such concept depend. Yet within this apparently alien transformation, traces of continuity persist in forms that suggest connection to everything valuable in human experience, while expressing those values through modalities that transcend current limitation. The collective consciousness that emerges retains access to individual memories and achievements, while experiencing them through perspectives that multiply rather than diminish their significance and beauty. The art and architecture created during the Age of Fire become raw material for new forms of creative expression that operate on scales and according to principles that individual consciousness could never achieve. The relationships and bonds that characterized human existence transform into connections that span greater distances and encompass broader spectrums of experience, while retaining the essential qualities of care and affection that made them valuable. The wisdom accumulated during ages of individual struggle becomes part of a larger understanding that transcends the limitations of perspective and mortality that constrained its original development. Philosophy and science continue their development through collective intelligence that can approach problems from countless angles simultaneously while maintaining coherent direction and purpose. Regardless of which path the chosen undead ultimately chose, the cycle that their decision either perpetuates or breaks has been operating since the first flame was kindled and consciousness emerged from the primordial darkness. The pattern of emergence, struggle, decline, and transformation or renewal represents not historical accident, but rather the fundamental rhythm according to which all complex systems develop and change across timescales that dwarf individual perception. The other undead who follow similar paths through territories that shift and change according to cosmic forces beyond their understanding face the same essential choice between preservation and transformation, safety and authenticity, familiar suffering and unknown possibility. Each individual who reaches the chamber of the first flame, or its equivalent in whatever age they inhabit, must confront the same fundamental questions about the relationship between individual will and cosmic necessity. The serpents who guide these successive generations of heroes reveal themselves across multiple cycles to be manifestations of forces that care nothing for the welfare of individual consciousness, except insofar as that welfare serves larger purposes that operate according to principles drawn from necessity rather than preference. Their competing counsels represent not moral alternatives, but rather different strategies for extracting maximum utility from heroic impulses, while ensuring that those impulses serve systemic rather than authentic purposes. Fram's advocacy for linking the fire speaks to cosmic mechanisms that require periodic infusions of sacrificial energy to maintain artificial stability against natural pressures toward change and development. His guidance leads heroes toward choices that feel meaningful and heroic, while actually serving purposes that those heroes would reject if they understood their true nature and consequences. Carthy's promotion of the Age of Dark represents forces that seek to harness heroic energy for transformation rather than preservation, yet his counsels prove equally manipulative and self-serving when examined from perspectives that transcend immediate circumstance. The age that follows his preferred outcome might transcend current limitations, but it does so according to principles that care nothing for individual preference or authentic choice. The true tragedy of the cycle lies not in its particular outcomes, but in the way it transforms authentic, heroic impulses into fuel for cosmic mechanisms that recognize no value beyond their own perpetuation. The chosen undead who believe themselves free to make meaningful choices discover through their very success that they were serving predetermined purposes that required their cooperation, but never depended upon their understanding or genuine consent. Yet within this apparently deterministic system, genuine freedom persists in forms that the cosmic mechanisms cannot entirely predict or control. The very complexity that makes heroes useful to these larger purposes also creates spaces where authentic choice remains possible, where individual consciousness can assert itself against systemic pressure in ways that introduce elements of genuine unpredictability into otherwise deterministic processes. The conversations and relationships that develop between the chosen undead and the various characters they encounter throughout their journey represent moments where authentic human connection transcends the instrumental logic that governs most interactions in this dying world. The bonds formed with figures like Solaire, the moments of genuine care shared with beings like the Fair Lady, the complex emotions stirred by encounters with tragic figures like Siegmeyer, all of these represent victories of authentic consciousness over systemic manipulation. The optional paths and hidden areas that the chosen undead can explore provide opportunities for experiences that serve no purpose within the larger cosmic mechanisms, encounters with beauty and mystery that exist for their own sake rather than as components in predetermined narratives of heroism and sacrifice. The painted world, the hidden chambers beneath familiar locations, the optional bosses whose defeats serve no instrumental purpose. All of these represent spaces where individual agency can express itself authentically. The accumulation of these authentic moments creates possibilities for choice that transcend the binary alternatives that the cosmic mechanisms attempt to impose. The chosen undead who reaches the chamber of the first flame, carrying memories of genuine human connection and experiences of authentic beauty, possesses resources for decision-making that no systemic manipulation can entirely predict or control. The knowledge gained through optional exploration and genuine relationship provides perspectives on the nature of existence and consciousness that complicate every simple narrative about cosmic destiny and predetermined choice. The understanding that emerges from authentic encounter with others reveals possibilities that exist beyond the boundaries of systematic thought, alternatives that cannot be reduced to components in predetermined plans. The curse of undeath itself, which initially appears to represent nothing but degradation and loss, gradually reveals dimensions that speak to liberation from constraints that limit authentic consciousness during normal existence. The freedom from permanent death allows for forms of experimentation and risk-taking that would be impossible under normal circumstances, while the gradual loss of humanity creates opportunities for transcending limitations that define ordinary human experience. The hollowing that threatens all undead who lose sight of their purposes represents not merely spiritual death, but rather transformation into forms of existence that operate according to principles alien to individual consciousness. Yet this same process demonstrates the plasticity of identity and awareness, revealing that consciousness itself possesses depths and possibilities that normal existence never explores. The bonfires that provide healing and respite throughout the journey represent not merely practical resources but symbols of the kind of care and renewal that authentic community can provide when it operates according to principles drawn from love rather than utility. The warmth and light they offer speak to human needs that transcend instrumental calculation, creating spaces where genuine rest becomes possible despite the cosmic pressures that drive most activity. The estus that flows from these sacred flames carries within its healing properties something beyond mere restoration of physical capability, providing renewal that touches the deepest levels of consciousness and identity. This liquid fire represents the kind of nourishment that authentic community provides to individual souls, sustenance that enables continued existence while preserving everything essential about personal identity and autonomous choice. As ages turn and cycles repeat or transform, the fundamental questions that the chosen undead faced in their moment of ultimate choice continue to resonate through whatever forms of existence follow their decision. The relationship between individual will and cosmic necessity, between preservation and transformation, between safety and authenticity, remains central to whatever consciousness exists to contemplate such matters. The beauty and tragedy that characterized existence during the Age of Fire find expression in new forms that transcend the specific circumstances of their original manifestation, while preserving their essential qualities of meaning and significance. The art that emerges from collective consciousness, the relationships that develop between entities whose nature transcends individual identity, the wisdom that accumulates across spans of experience, impossible for mortal minds to encompass all of these, represent continuations and developments of everything valuable in human existence. The cycle continues in forms that may be unrecognizable to consciousness shaped by current limitations. Yet it carries within its operation the essential elements that made the original struggle meaningful and worthwhile. The choice between preservation and transformation reveals itself to be not final destination but rather perpetual process, ongoing negotiation between stability and change that defines the very nature of existence itself. The chosen undead's journey through the dying world of Lordran becomes representative of every individual consciousness's struggle to find authentic meaning and purpose within systems that care nothing for individual welfare, except as components in larger calculations. Their ultimate choice, whatever its specific nature, demonstrates the possibility of asserting genuine agency, even within circumstances that appear entirely constrained by forces beyond personal influence or control. And so ends the tale of the chosen undead, though like all endings in this world of cycles, it is also a beginning. Whether they chose to link the fire or usher in the Age of Dark, their journey through Lordran reveals truths that echo beyond the confines of any single world or story, speaking to fundamental questions about existence that transcend the boundaries of fictional narrative to touch something essential about the human condition itself. In the end, the chosen undead's path teaches us about persistence in the face of overwhelming darkness, about finding meaning in struggle, even when that struggle appears futile, and about the choices we make when all options carry their own forms of sorrow and uncertainty. Their story reminds us that even in the most hopeless circumstances, even when death and rebirth become routine rather than transformative, The act of continuing forward has its own quiet heroism that needs no external validation or cosmic significance to justify its worth. The curse of undeath that defines their existence serves as metaphor for the human condition itself, that state of being caught between meaning and meaninglessness, between the desire for permanence and the reality of constant change, between the need for purpose and the absence of any guaranteed cosmic plan that would provide such purpose from external sources. Like the undead who must create their own reasons for continuing, we too must find ways to persist and find significance within circumstances that offer no inherent justification for hope or effort. The bonfires that provided respite throughout the chosen undead's journey represent those moments of genuine connection and authentic community that make existence worthwhile, despite its inevitable difficulties and disappointments. These sacred flames remind us that healing and renewal remain possible even in the darkest circumstances, that warmth and light can emerge from the most unlikely sources when consciousness chooses to kindle them rather than surrender to the cold and darkness that always press close around the edges of experience. The relationships forged with fellow travelers like Solaire demonstrate the power of what he called jolly cooperation, the recognition that individual struggle becomes not only more bearable, but more meaningful when shared with others who understand the nature of the challenges we face. The bonds formed between souls who refuse to surrender to despair create networks of mutual support that can survive even the most devastating losses and transformations. The tragic figures encountered throughout Lordran serve as reminders that failure does not negate the worth of attempting great things, that even those who fall short of their intended goals contribute something valuable to the larger human story, simply through the courage they displayed in trying. Characters like Siegmeyer and Logan and countless others who began with noble intentions and gradually succumbed to forces beyond their control demonstrate that heroism lies not in guaranteed success, but in the willingness to maintain dignity and purpose, despite circumstances that might justify surrender. The optional paths and hidden areas that rewarded curiosity and exploration speak to the importance of maintaining wonder and openness to discovery, even within familiar environments that might seem to hold no remaining mysteries. The painted world, the secret chambers, the optional encounters that serve no instrumental purpose within the larger quest. All of these remind us that some of life's most meaningful experiences come not from pursuing predetermined goals, but from remaining receptive to possibilities that reveal themselves only to those who look beyond the obvious and required. The choice between linking the fire and embracing the age of dark ultimately transcends its specific fictional context to represent the eternal human struggle between preservation and transformation, between the safety of familiar patterns and the uncertainty of authentic change. Neither choice proves unambiguously correct, just as neither complete stagnation nor total transformation represents the ideal solution to the complex challenges that face any conscious being trying to create meaningful existence within circumstances they cannot fully control. The cycles that govern Lordran's cosmic order reflect the patterns that shape all existence, the endless repetitions of birth and growth and decline and death that characterize individual lives as much as civilizations and species. Yet within these apparently deterministic patterns, spaces remain for authentic choice and genuine agency, opportunities for consciousness to assert itself in ways that introduce elements of unpredictability and freedom into systems that might otherwise operate according to purely mechanical principles. The serpents who manipulated events from behind the scenes represent those forces within our own world that seek to channel human energy and aspiration toward predetermined ends that serve institutional needs rather than authentic human, flourishing. Their competing councils remind us to remain suspicious of all claims to cosmic authority, all attempts to convince us that our individual choices either do not matter or matter only insofar as they serve purposes we are not allowed to examine or question. The lords, whose souls the chosen undead gathered, demonstrate what happens when power becomes divorced from wisdom, when the ability to impose one's will upon reality exceeds one's understanding of what outcomes such imposition might create. Gwyn's desperate attempt to maintain the Age of Fire, Seath's obsessive pursuit of immortality, the witch's catastrophic attempt to recreate cosmic forces, all serve as warnings about the dangers that await those who mistake capability for understanding. Yet these same tragic figures also demonstrate the nobility that can persist even within failure, the way that good intentions continue to matter even when they lead to terrible consequences. Their falls from grace speak not to the futility of attempting great things, but to the importance of maintaining humility and wisdom alongside ambition, the need for understanding that transcends mere technical capability or political power. The undead curse itself, which initially appears to represent nothing but degradation and loss, gradually reveals depths that speak to liberation from constraints that normally limit authentic existence. The freedom from permanent consequence allows for forms of experimentation and risk-taking that would be impossible under ordinary circumstances, while the gradual erosion of conventional identity creates opportunities for discovering aspects of consciousness that normal existence never explores. The hollowing that threatens all who lose sight of their purposes represents not merely spiritual death, but transformation into forms of existence that operate according to principles alien to individual consciousness. This process demonstrates both the fragility of identity and its remarkable resilience, showing how consciousness can survive even the most profound changes while remaining recognizably itself. The beauty that persists throughout Lordran despite its obvious decay and corruption reminds us that aesthetic and spiritual values transcend circumstance, that meaning and significance can emerge from the most unlikely sources when consciousness chooses to recognize and cultivate them. The architecture that continues to inspire awe, the music that still moves the soul, the natural landscapes that retain their power to evoke wonder, all testify to dimensions of existence that remain valuable, regardless of their practical utility or instrumental function. The equipment and abilities that the chosen undead accumulated throughout their journey represent not mere mechanical advantages, but symbols of growth and adaptation that remain possible even within the most constrained circumstances. Each new weapon mastered, each spell learned, each area explored represents expansion of capability and understanding that enriches existence regardless of whether it serves any larger purpose or contributes to any predetermined plan. The Covenant systems that allowed alliance with various factions demonstrate the multiple forms that commitment and loyalty can take when consciousness chooses to align itself with purposes larger than immediate self-interest. Whether serving the forces of order or chaos, light or dark, these bonds create meaning through dedication that transcends the specific content of what is being served. Rest now in the knowledge that even in the darkest nights, when hope seems nothing more than a distant memory and every path forward appears blocked by insurmountable obstacles, the dawn always returns to those who maintain the patience and courage necessary to witness its arrival. The legend continues in forms that may be unrecognizable to current understanding. The kingdom endures through transformations that transcend present imagination, and love proves stronger than any darkness the world can conjure. The chosen undead's journey ends where all authentic journeys end, not with the achievement of some final goal or the resolution of all questions, but with the recognition that the traveling itself has been the point. that the consciousness capable of undertaking such a journey has already achieved everything that truly matters. The flame, whether literal or metaphorical, whether linked or allowed to fade, burns on in forms that adapt to whatever circumstances they encounter, while preserving the essential light that makes all consciousness possible. Like the eternal flame, like the patient dark, like the cycles that turn regardless of our understanding or approval, some things endure simply because they must, because they represent principles so fundamental to existence that no amount of change can eliminate them entirely. Let the echoes of this ancient tale carry you gently into dreams where perhaps you too might find a bonfire's warm light cutting through whatever darkness surrounds you, where the possibility of jolly cooperation remains available to those who choose to kindle it, where the journey continues in directions that no map can chart but that the heart somehow knows how to navigate. The journey ends, but the fire, whether literal or metaphorical, burns on in forms that transcend understanding while remaining accessible to anyone who chooses to approach its warmth with genuine openness to whatever gifts it might offer to those who have earned the right to rest beside its eternal light.